You good? Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the City of Des Moines Zoning Board of Adjustment. This board has the power under Iowa law and the zoning ordinance of the City of Des Moines to hear requests for variances and exceptions from the regulations in the zoning ordinance, to review and consider conditional use permit requests, and to review appeals from the decision of the staff in the administration of the zoning ordinance, and to then make decisions in such matters. The members of this board are citizens of the City of Des Moines and have been appointed to this board by the City Council. The board members are volunteers and receive no compensation for their public service. I'm going to take a moment here and introduce the members of our board as well as our city staff that will be assisting with the process today. For board members, on the audience's right is Justin Gross. Next to him is Dave Gare. On the audience's left is Cindy Smith. Next to her is Marlis Jones, and I'm Mel Pins, the board chair. And we should have Nathan Blake arriving shortly. We'll have 6 of our 7 members present today. I'll introduce our city staff. City's legal counsel on my left is Judy Parks Cruz. Down here in the front row by the podium is Bert Drost, city planner, Catherine Dostart, city planner, Eric Lundy, city planner, and Sue-Ann Donovan, the city's zoning enforcement officer. I'll go through the procedure here. For some of you, this may be the first time you're in front of us. You may hope it's the only time you're in front of us. So I'll give you how our process will work today, but we'll take each and every one of you through the process. So don't worry about the formality. We'll help everybody along here. This is an open public meeting, but it is a formal legal hearing. The meeting is being recorded, both audio and visual. In fact, we should be broadcasting live or in reruns on the city's cable channel. The board members have received a copy of the agenda and the staff recommendations. Copies of this agenda and the staff recommendations are available in the tray right outside the door here, so if you haven't grabbed one yet, when I'm done with my opening remarks, feel free to step up and grab an agenda. This board is required to base its decision in each case upon the criteria established by law for the type of relief sought by the applicant. The law applicable to each case has been identified in the written staff report, and if the facts, as determined by this board, demonstrates that the criteria established by law for granting the relief has been satisfied, then the board must grant the relief. Otherwise, the board must deny the requested relief. Each appeal will be announced in the order as presented on the agenda. Staff will first give a brief presentation and explanation of the appeal. Any written comments received by the staff prior to the hearing will be distributed to the board or otherwise identified during the staff's presentation. After the staff presentation, the appellant or a representative of the appellant will be allowed to speak first. They will be allowed up to 10 minutes to present their appeal and the reasoning for their request. Anyone else present in support of the appeal will then be allowed up to 5 minutes each to present their comments. Following that, anyone present in opposition to the appeal will be allowed up to 5 minutes each to present their comments of opposition. If there is opposition to the requested appeal, the applicant will be allowed up to 3 minutes for a rebuttal or other closing comments. All speakers are requested to speak from only the podium up here at the front to your front left, and to begin your presentation by first giving both your name and address. If you're a resident here or a property owner, you can give the address of your home or location. If you're here in a professional capacity as an attorney, an engineer, architect, etc., you can give the address of your office or place of employment. All speakers are requested to remain courteous and to focus their comments only upon those facts that demonstrate whether or not the criteria established by law for granting the relief has been satisfied. Speakers are also asked to ensure that they are respectful of time considerations, and if necessary, the board chair will limit further comments by a speaker if they exceed their time limitations. After testimony is provided by all speakers, the board will close any further public comment, and the board will immediately deliberate the request, and we will make a decision here today on that specific item. If your appeal is approved by this board, we ask that you wait until about a week from now to go to the Permit and Development Center if you need any necessary building permits. This will allow the decision of the board to be documented in the form of a decision and order. That decision and order will be provided not only to you, but to our permit staff as well. Any appeal that is approved by this board must be implemented, constructed, or otherwise utilized within 2 years of the date of the decision by this board. Otherwise, such approval shall expire. Items listed on the consent portion of the agenda, which is the first segment of the agenda, are not planned to be individually discussed or for us to receive any testimony or summary. We will consider those items for approval in accordance with the recommendation in the staff report, unless there's an individual present in the audience or a member of this board that requests the item be removed from the consent agenda and separately considered under the public hearing agenda. So I'll come back to that consent agenda in just a few minutes, but basically we would be looking at granting approval to those items on the consent agenda as they've been presented. The decisions of this board can only be appealed in the Polk County District Court. So if you believe you have been harmed by an error made by this board, your only remedy is to seek relief through the district court within 30 days of the filing of the board's decision and order. If you believe the zoning regulations applied by this board are wrong, you may petition the city council to change those regulations for future considerations. All material that is written or otherwise used today as part of any presentation will become a permanent part of the record and will not be returned. So if you plan to show us any documents, photographs, drawings, etc., you'll either need to leave those with staff for the record or be prepared to provide a suitable copy. Just a few housekeeping items. We ask that you avoid any undue conversation in the audience so as to not be disruptive from the hearing that is in progress. And you're doing a great job so far. Please also ensure your cell phone has been silenced. Again, good job. And if you need to use the restroom, you can leave through the door here, walk past the staircase. You don't have to go down the stairs. There's restrooms to the left just past the staircase. Once the agenda item you are interested in has been completed, you are welcome to leave the hearing. And we'll have a 10-minute break in the hearing after 3 o'clock if that may be needed. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the agenda again to see if we have any final changes to what's being presented. Bert?
Yeah, I do have a couple changes. Bert Dross, planner for the City of Des Moines. Item number 3, the appeal at 2908 67th Street. Staff has recommended approval, but we did get a comment card back in opposition and an email from the Merle Hay Neighborhood Association. So staff is moving number 3 to the discussion portion of the agenda. And then item number 5 is a request to amend a conditional use for a concert venue at 1159 24th Street. Staff's recommended approval of amending the conditions. The applicant's in agreement with that, and we've received support from the Drake Neighborhood Association and from 3 of the other neighbors. So staff's comfortable moving number 5 to the consent agenda.
Okay. Is there anybody here in the audience that would be in opposition to us granting approval for item 5? That's a conditional use request at 1159 24th Street. Anybody here in opposition, just raise your hand if you are. Okay, seeing none. Are there any further questions, comments, or concerns from the board? If none, would there be a motion to move item 5 to consent?
So, second.
Okay, we got a motion by Marlis, second by Nathan. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All right, unanimous, that's 6-0. So we'll move item 5 to consent. All right, so what I'm going to do here briefly, I'm going to read through all those items that are shown now to be on the consent agenda. And if anybody would be opposed to us granting approvals, which would be subject to the staff conditions as listed. If anybody's in opposition to the approval or the staff conditions, raise your hand and then we'll take your testimony and move that to the regular part of the hearing. Otherwise, we'll be looking to approve the following items. Item 1, a variance request at 111 East Grand Avenue. Anybody here in opposition to that? Seeing none. Item 2 is a conditional use permit request for Casey's General Stores at 5150 East 14th Street. Anybody in opposition to that present? Seeing none. Then we will add in item number 5, and I'll just go through that again quickly. That's an amendment to a conditional use permit at 1159 24th Street. Anybody here in opposition to that? Okay, seeing none, from the board's perspective, any questions, comments, or concerns on items 1, 2, or 5? If none, would there be a motion to grant approval?
So moved.
All right, motion by Justin, second by Marlis. All those in favor of granting the requested variances, exceptions, and conditional use permits, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that carries 6-0. So if you were here for items 1, 2, or 5, they've been approved subject to the staff recommendations, and you'll get a copy of that order approval in about a week. And if you have any further questions on those approvals, you can talk to the staff here after the hearing. So for those of you here for those first items, thanks for coming in. Have a good afternoon. All right, then what we'll do here for the regular portion of the agenda, we will begin with item 3. Catherine's going to help present on that. It's an exception request at 2908 67th Street.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Catherine Dostart, City Planner. The item before us is a duplex up on the very northwest edge of Des Moines, bordering on Urbandale. The applicant has requested to install additional pavement for off-street parking to facilitate the fact that this is a duplex. Staff is in favor of this just due to the fact that there's some contours of the land that make it hard for them to put any parking, off-street parking on the other side of the duplex. And the existing parking, it would require tandem parking. We've also evaluated it and noticed that it's a little hard to see in the aerial, but it would be very difficult for tandem parking to actually fit 2 cars outside of the right-of-way on the existing parking lot. Just another site photo there. And then, as mentioned, we did have 1 card in opposition and a letter from the neighborhood association in opposition to this, but staff has recommended approval of the exception to add 696 square feet of pavement within the front yard area. And then we just had a few conditions limiting it to what they have shown. And then, as you might have noticed in this aerial, they are putting the apron outside of the right-of-way area. But if they were to widen the drive approach, they would have to come back in, and it would be subject to a curb cut permit, and it could not exceed the general 24 feet that we restrict all driveways to. And then, of course, it would have to be in compliance with all of our codes. So if there are any questions that I can answer for you, or perhaps if not, the applicant.
So Catherine, just briefly here, we already have side-by-side parking.
Correct.
But in tandem, meaning one in front of the other, one behind the other.
Correct.
So we'd just be deepening the parking there, is that correct, as far as?
They would be adding to the side with an apron. Right now, you could probably stack tandem, but it would not be the 2 vehicles. The length of them would probably not be outside of the right-of-way.
All right, that's what
They would be within the right-of-way, so they would
Okay.
not be off-street parking. So they're
So-
looking for the right to add
That
on
would-
some parking to facilitate.
And is that almost double of what the existing drive is now?
It would be under, since it's exception level, so I'm not sure of the percentage.
I think she's just asking about the current square footage versus the total square footage that it might be later.
Right, so I said double, but it would have to be under that, and it looks like it's just an exception of 54 square feet over what they would be allowed
Right, but
right to add, so it would be less than 25%, so.
Do you believe their drawing to be generally accurate? I know sometimes we have, quote, sketches that it may not quite look that way.
This is what usually comes from the permit and development counter
Okay.
to us. So usually the zoning inspectors at the counter will try to be as accurate as
Sure.
possible.
So since a car could sometimes be at least 18 foot long, if we add in this kind of angled additional parking there, if there's already 2 cars parked there, the additional parking would still block them in. They wouldn't be able to maneuver to get out without driving off the pavement.
That would depend on the appellant and the property owner on how they would facilitate all that parking.
Okay.
We don't have jurisdiction over
Okay.
how they choose to
Yep.
align that parking.
And if they choose not to coordinate that, then people will drive over the grass and drive over the right-of-way to get out. Is there parking on the street on Sherrick or 67th now allowed?
It's a good question. I don't think I paid strict attention to it, but I don't remember seeing signage that.
Okay. And maybe the applicant or anyone else can help us with that. Bert, did you have any?
Sometimes
Did you see some from the aerial there? Yeah.
Usually allowed on one side when they're
Right. Okay. All right.
And I would just add that this general area is predominantly two-family housing, so this would not be out of character with the neighborhood.
Does that include the property to the south there that has the 2 driveways?
Yes, that one is a
that to the
two-family.
north?
It has 2 addresses.
Okay.
These all have 2 addresses. I believe this one does too. That one has 2 addresses, and that has 2 addresses
Okay.
assigned to it.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? All right, thanks, Catherine. Okay, so the way the hearing works, we get to hear from the applicant first. They have up to 10 minutes to present their appeal. Is the applicant present? Come on up. And we just need your name and address, and then you got up to 10 minutes to give us your reasoning why we should grant this exception.
Gotcha, thank you. My name is Michael Hammond. My residence is 1645 Northwest 104th Street in Clive, but I also own the property that we're talking about, the 2906 and 2908 67th Street. It's a duplex. One is a 2 and one is a 3-bedroom duplex, so we obviously can have number of licensed drivers there. We purchased it on October 31st. It's a unique property in that to the north, it's a steep drop down, so I cannot extend that drive. So therefore, we are limited to where we are. It currently has 2 wide, and as she mentioned, you stack the 2 up, then in fact we're dropping the right, or we're blocking the right of way. And so it's also unique in that Sherrick and 67 connection is that there are lots of drives, and because of that curve, there's very limited on-street parking. So therefore, my biggest concern, and I think the concern of the previous owner, has been, what do you do with these cars? With 5 potential bedrooms, who knows, 3 or 4, total. And because of the fact the off-street or the on-street parking is so incredibly limited, and we have so many duplexes in the area, I'm just trying to do what we can to facilitate my tenants, but more importantly, facilitate the city of Des Moines and get as many cars off as we can. Mr. Pins, as far as your regard, the apron hopefully is wide enough where we park all north to south. So we're not going east to west. North to south, we can span an apron just a little bit. It's a pretty good angle, and I think that drawing was done by the counter, whatever that was.
Sure.
And so we worked our way through that. We simply have a rule. The rule is you park in your spaces, you go to the front of it, and I think with the apron being widened to the east, there's plenty of access to get to the other 3 and then the 4 parking spots. The alternative is to stacking cars and blocking right-of-ways, or trying to find parking in front of other people's driveways and mailboxes. And so that's my concern, is how do we facilitate the city and how we facilitate tenants and the neighborhood as well. So I was not aware if there was a card. I don't know if that's a concern or I don't know how those work. There you go. Okay, I got you. Yeah. Prefer the green space. And I can appreciate that. I thought I had a front yard, and I thought this was a side yard. But I learned very quickly I have 2 front yards. And so therefore, the 67th Street, nothing's going to be affected whatsoever. This is going to be in the Sherrick side, which obviously is what I consider to be the side yard, and the existing parking as well. So I'm with it. We have the issue as far as the concern is precipitation, the runoff. This property has a drastic drop in the back. We're going to redo all the gutters and get those running, correctly. It's just a property that, quite honestly, 50 years old and has probably been a bit ignored. And so we're spending an incredible amount of time just revamping the entire duplex, making it modern, doing all the inside and soon to be outside anemones to make this a nice, pleasant place to live in cooperation with what the neighborhood's trying to do. So.
Okay. All right. Questions for Michael? Michael, I just have a brief one. I know it sounds like topography is challenging here, but beyond the city's aerial photo here, can't quite tell. Is there a reason why you just couldn't push your tandem parking to the north further?
It's a great question. I've got a picture if you like. It would be a ski slope.
Okay, because again, it drops right off.
It literally is pushed. The parking lot is currently, and it might be fill up there.
Yeah.
Another 3 more feet. In fact, I worry about setting a dumpster there. The dumpster worries.
Okay.
So we are far north as we can, and it's a friendly neighborhood.
Yep.
I want people to walk the dogs and use the sidewalks, and currently, quite honestly, it's not been done.
Right. Right. And you do have a public sidewalk that wraps around the property there?
Around the entire property,
Okay.
yeah.
All right,
And
I've
a
gotcha.
lot of people use that, and I hate it when cars block up and all of a
Yep.
sudden.
I don't like that in my neighborhood either, and it
Yeah,
happens a
and so I'm
lot.
doing what I can to facilitate the topography that I have and try to make it as user-friendly as possible, but I can't find any alternative. We're just simply gonna widen it a little bit so I get some cars off street.
Okay.
Off street, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Okay, so next step is there anybody here to speak in support of the applicant's request? They could have up to 5 minutes. Seeing none, is there anybody here to speak in opposition to the applicant's request? Okay, going once, going twice. If none, do we have any further questions for staff as a board? If none, we'll close the public portion then and go to board deliberation. What do you
Mr.
think?
Chair, I'd like to move staff.
Second.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second to move staff recommendation, which would be for approval, subject to the conditions that are present. So, all those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, looks like motion carries 6-0. Okay, well-presented case, you've got some unique terrain there, so keep making the property and the neighborhood better. Just thank you very much, Michael. All right. So that brings us then on our regular portion of the agenda. We will now review item number 4, a variance request at 4,000 Merle Hay Road, which is basically Merle Hay Mall. Or a portion of it.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, item number 4 is a request to reconstruct a freestanding sign that was previously in existence that had been knocked over by a motorist, and then the sign contractor removed the sign from the site to take it back to the shop to repair. If they wouldn't have taken it away to repair, it wouldn't have lost grandfather rights or legal non-conforming rights. So I'll let the applicant explain that better, but the subject sign is located right here at the entrance when you come into the former Sears building. So it's actually on the property that's owned by Sears still. This is actually a Photoshop rendering that shows what the sign would look like. And again, it's really putting back the sign exactly how it was before it was taken away from the site for repair. Mm-hmm. And here's a site photo. You can see what's left of the sign that was there. And here are some other photos that show, they have 4 or 5 of these exact same signs throughout the Merle Hay Mall campus. Here's another example. So again, really all they're wanting to do is to replace one of these that was knocked over. But as you can see, it doesn't have the 2-foot tall masonry base that goes along the entire sign face. So as staff, we have to take the hard look at that and say, well, it is the city council's intent or desire to get all of our signs to eventually be in conformance with the freestanding monument sign regulations. So as you'll see in the recommendation, we have recommended denial of the variances. Here's the consent map. You can see the 2 cards. came in support. And then we had an email here from Jason Poling with the Merle Hay Neighborhood Association and also from Chris Morse. Just said they are comfortable with the city staff recommendation, which was for denial. So but again, the variances would allow them to put up the sign exactly how it was before it was destroyed. Or not, it wasn't technically destroyed, it was just damaged to the point it needed repair, and so they took it off-site. So.
And Bert, from a, I don't know, technicality or regulatory perspective, as long as they repaired it on site and it was less than, what, 60% of the value of the sign or something, they would have been allowed to fix it and keep
Right.
it, right?
Right.
Okay, all right.
And
But in
talking-
essence, since it was removed by percentage of volume or area, the majority of the sign was removed, then we have to start over.
Right,
Is that
since
right?
it was taken
Okay.
off.
What if they couldn't repair it on site?
Well, if it couldn't have been repaired on site and it was more than 60%, then it would lose its non-conforming rights.
But if it was less than 60% and they couldn't repair it on
Then-
site, they had to take it, do they have to ask our
Value.
permission?
No, once it comes off the site, then the zoning ordinance is black and white to that issue, so it would lose its rights.
Seems pretty punitive, but okay.
And
That's also where the sign company might need to pause once in a while and go, now, maybe I should double check the ordinance before I
Yeah,
get
it
too
was a
far
learning
into
lesson
this.
for them, for sure.
To the best of your knowledge, that existing base, is that actual limestone rock or is that a poured base with,
I would have to let them.
Okay.
It looks, I mean, if you look at their other signs, it looks
like it's real flagstone? Because could there be a meet in the middle, or did staff maybe suggest in your own, as you put this together, well, gee, if they filled in the sign base, it might not be tall enough, but if we just, they just filled in the other half so we had a solid base throughout, that'd be a little meet
Yeah,
in the
that
middle?
was really staff's desire, was to do it across the entire width and to make sure it was a minimum of 2 feet tall.
Oh, there you go, okay, all right.
How many of these signs are on site, Bert?
I think 5 or about 5, give or take.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Nathan?
So this sign is partially functions as a directional sign. Is there any difference in the regulations
No,
for those?
The code just says any freestanding sign needs to be a monument sign with a minimum 2 foot tall base.
Okay.
But if they're internal, do they still?
If it's visible from the public right of way, which
Okay.
it clearly is.
Well, this one is, but the other
Yeah.
ones? Yeah,
Well, I guess they'd have to make the case that they're not visible, but
yeah.
But even that public right-of-way, and you don't have to agree with me, but I think the public right-of-way is a considerable distance away to be, quote, visible, is it not?
well, it's a straight shot down this Madison Avenue extension.
Okay, all right.
But you have to drive into the mall to see it. You don't
As a low
notice it off
sign.
Madison Avenue or off Merle Hay or Douglas.
All right.
Right, no, I know it's a tough sell for staff, that's why our
Okay.
staff rec, we have the alternative conditions if the board is inclined to support it.
Okay, well, we'll see which way the cookie crumbles here with some further testimony. Any other questions for Bert? All right, thank you, sir. Okay, applicant or representative, come on down. And we just need your name and address, and you've got up to 10 minutes.
I don't usually do this, so I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I'm Donna Stapleton. I'm the general manager of Merle Hay Mall. The address is 3850 Merle Hay Road, Suite 101, Des Moines, Iowa, 50310.
Okay?
First, I'd like to clear up that the sign was hit by a motorist on December 28th, 2018. So we have been trying to work this out. But when the sign was hit for public safety concerns, our maintenance staff removed the sign. The sign has not left the property. It is in our maintenance garage. And it's been held there while we've been trying to figure this out. So it is located where our parking garage is on the north portion, just south of that Sears line. But this was during the Christmas break. we are pedestrian-friendly mall. We have lots of buses. We didn't want something just laying there that someone could get hurt. And so we made the decision to remove it before we even contacted a sign company. If we had known that that was what would take us out of legal non-conforming status, we would have not done that.
Okay.
So shortly thereafter, we contacted Eagle Sign to Repair, and Joe Phillips can answer any questions relative to the sign itself. But we just want to preserve the uniqueness of the sign. It's very unique, and I just made a little map. I guess, do you put it right here?
Yep.
Is that? So the red stars are where the existing signs are, and they are all directional, and the gold star is where the one is that's missing. And I noticed you had signs, but I just made copies of all of them, taken this morning, so. But we just want to maintain our consistent sign package. And also, this particular directional sign is very important to Kohl's because they're located on the backside without street frontage. And so when people come in, they need to know which direction to get to Kohl's. And that's why this particular one is important. And I'm here to answer any questions, or Joe.
Sure. All right, questions for Donna?
No, I think what you answered a question that I had, could you just do without the sign? But the Kohl's issue, I totally get it. It's sort of hidden back there.
Right.
So if you weren't familiar with the area, you would need to know where to go. Because if you went the other way, you would, there's not a way to cut around back. You'd have to go back out onto the main streets and get around. So it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
But you need signage there.
when you're talking about the new sign, I mean, and the other existing signs are talking about some sort of uniformity, right? I mean, this other sign would just be not an eyesore, but it'd be a totally different look than the other 4 signs, correct?
No, it would be the exact same sign, except for the directions for the stores would be different.
That's if
Right.
the exception was granted, but if it wasn't, then it would have a totally different look, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
And I know that staff mentioned that they talked to us about extending the base over, but when we tried to do that, then the sign became too tall. And so we've tried to work with the city in order to come to a compromise, and that's why we're here.
And the issue with the sign being, quote, too tall would be your kind of vertical blade with Merle
Yes.
hay on it would
Yes.
kind of throw that off kilter then for height. Because what is that? Is it 10 foot tall or so? Something
10 foot
close?
10.
Okay, yeah. See, you're just eyeballing it. Okay. All right, any other questions for Donna? Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else here to speak in support of the applicant? They can have up to 5 minutes. Seeing none, anybody here to speak in opposition to the applicant? Okay, seeing none, any further questions for staff? Don't see any. All right, we'll close public portion, go to board deliberation.
I'd like to make a motion to grant the variance.
I'll second.
This is a directional deal. This isn't, and I know where staff's coming from. We need to give them a gray crayon, but they don't get one. So,
And since we're looking at a variance to kind of meet the variance test, it can be important to kind of talk to some of those variance conditions or reasoning.
I just think from a consistency standpoint, this is more directional than it is, and it's quite a ways off the street, so I wouldn't even consider it a sign, but
It's internal, and the issue with it being taller and wider and bigger could be distracting for drivers. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts when you get into any mall.
Okay?
Go
Sure,
left,
sure.
go right, go straight. You've got other traffic coming at you, so
I think
to
she
be
gave
honest,
us-
I go there a lot, and I haven't really paid that much attention to these signs, which is a good thing because that means it's fairly innocuous. It's there for people who need it.
Well, I think she made a great point about why they removed it.
Right.
And I think for us to require people to leave it in place and fix it there, or you're in violation, seems a little bit severe to me,
Okay.
so.
All right.
Mr.
so-
Chair, I'd second it.
Yeah, so the motion was by Dave, Second by Cindy. Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, all right. In principle, but in practice, you have been approved to reinstall your sign. Just double check with the city on that reinstall. As long as you meet our conditions and meet the other construction requirements, you should be good. So, and we look forward to other cool things happening up at Merle Hay. Just up there last week for a good movie and some shopping, so keep up the good work there. You bet. Game day, okay, all right. You bet, you're welcome. Okay, that brings us to our next item up for bid, which will be item number 6, an exception and variance request at 728 East Border Street. We're going to have Eric Lundy present on this one.
Yes, I never go that direction. I always go the other way. I'm always coming from the interstate. But when you're near the other restaurant, it's not me. I think there's only one car there.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, this property is in the area of Warren County that was annexed in 2009. At that time, that property came in at A1. That was A1 through last Friday. When this application was made, it was made under the ordinance at that time. It is under, the property is under, it's an irregular piece, it's under 10 acres, so as A1, it was not automatically allowed to have a single-family dwelling at a time when the single-family dwelling on the property was destroyed by fire, I believe. So that when that was removed, it lost any rights to having a single-family dwelling after a period of time. Since that time, the appellant has been seeking to allow reuse of a accessory building on the property. In this area, I believe it's a 34 by 34. I'm sorry, 32 by 32. That's right tucked up against what we consider a side lot line in A1, which is up against the bypass. So when they acquired right away for the bypass, they preserved this on the property and didn't take it at that time. So it sits there. It's the only, well, there's another little small garage right in this area, single garage. And I believe the house was in this area before it was destroyed. So the appellant is seeking to make a residence on the property by renovating the 32 by 32 building, and also is asking to waive the requirement that parking be accessed by an off-street parking be accessed by an unpaved drive. With the existing drive you can see there in the aerial. I'm going to see if I can show you the building. I didn't print off my phone, so I apologize, but so when you go to the site, I'm going to have Bert zoom in on it. So this is looking from Border Street. You can see the bypass in the background. So this is the building we're talking about on the property.
So they want to convert the existing building into a single-family home and expand it further
Yes.
vertically?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a little bit of a sketch that was provided at the time of the application and to indicate that it was only 7 feet from that northwest property line. So that's one of the appeals, is the allowance to outbuildings in A1 didn't have the same requirement for setbacks, I don't believe is the principal structure. So once you make this a single-family dwelling, it becomes the principal structure. Just kind of as a point of reference, the ordinance now considers this EX in accordance with the long-range plan, which contemplates business park kind of redevelopment for this area. So whether they had applied under the previous ordinance or the existing, they would be facing a process to allow a dwelling on this property. If it would have been, this past Monday or forward, they'd be looking at a rezoning to allow residential use of the property. So, given the context, I think staff looked at this under the exception of the lot area for allowing a dwelling under A1. We didn't have any concern about the fact that it was under 10 acres. It was about 7.19 acres in size, so it's fairly substantial in size for a single-family dwelling. There's plenty of land if necessary for a septic system that might have to be installed at some point in time. I think there's potentially one in place already, but if it ever failed, they would have to probably have a new one that met current codes. Again, we're not opposed to having a single-family dwelling here, so we think we could justify granting the exception, but to give the relief of the variance on the narrow setback on the west, and then not provide paved access to the parking. We weren't able to find that they demonstrated meeting the test for variance. Again, you're probably going to hear from the applicant that their means to build a new house on the property probably isn't necessarily readily available. When you look at the criteria for variance, it doesn't necessarily take into account their personal financial situation, but rather something due to the land would have to cause them to be out of their own making. Again, I think the land is sufficient to accommodate a house that meets the setback and provide paved access. So we would recommend denial of the two variances at this time.
Questions for Eric?
There's the one card that you received. It is that one parcel that had been carved out. The property actually goes around.
And Eric, if these folks own the property and this other structure wasn't already present, I'm guessing they probably would not choose to locate a house right there. And so I'm guessing what's driving this is, again, we have a footprint of the existing accessory structure. But even if we were inclined to grant this, that brings us right back around to building code. Would the current footings of the accessory structure meet requirements for a single family home?
There's probably some attention to requiring update to the footings, whether they either over excavate and pour additional footings or brace other structural elements to make that meet code. That's going to be something they'll have to demonstrate.
Which can also be costly and require excavation, much as if they would just leave that existing accessory there, which they could, correct?
Yes.
And build a house maybe to the east of that.
Yeah, and that's I think what staff is suggesting. Yeah, this could also be relocated. Again, you'd have to have a new footing.
Right. Kind of what I'm getting at is I doubt whether if we grant this today, they'll just be able to go run and add on a second story to that and everybody's happy. They're probably going to have to do a lot of extra engineering because I'm assuming that structure was built under previous Warren County building codes, which personally, in my opinion, when I lived there, were non-existent. You don't have to comment on that.
I think we had the chance to meet with the applicant in a pre-app. He's pretty aware, I think, of what
the city's requirements would be.
Building code elements are going to be necessary. I believe he's engaged in the trades, so.
Okay, so he knows what he's doing.
I'll let him make his case on that. He was
Sure.
pretty articulate about his plans about reusing of this, so I think that's been thought through.
All right.
But didn't you say that it had just been rezoned and the new zone that it's in wouldn't allow for single-family housing to be built on it, except for with some sort of...
So pursuant to this appeal, still because it was made prior to the,
But, I mean, he couldn't build then
only if the relief were granted.
Right.
Right.
And I don't want to get too protracted on this, but we have had cases in the past, and again, I understand that at the time the application was filed, the old zoning ordinance was in effect, but when cities have had community development plans or district development plans, both staff and the courts have allowed this board to take those into consideration that, hey, look, we're trying to head a new direction. So if we've got people that not only want variances from the current ordinance, but it would certainly violate a future ordinance as well, that can we not take those kinds of plans into account to at least a degree?
Certainly you can take the plan DSM into account.
Okay.
I think that the direction the appellant was given is that for your own purposes, if this goes forward, you would want to seek rezoning of the property so that you had permanent rights. You know, so you wouldn't lose anything if it was destroyed again, or so that would maybe be in their longer term picture for zoning actions that would be need to be taken. I don't think they wanted to go that far with it until they knew they could do this project.
And you can't probably promise odds if they wanted to get it to rezone, how successful that would be. Because otherwise, otherwise we get into a lot of spot zoning when we have a brand new zoning ordinance.
Yeah, so. People always want us to speculate on where the city council will hit on this or that, but we don't try to do that.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions for Eric? Okay, thank you. All right, applicant or representative of the applicant. Good afternoon, welcome.
Good afternoon.
You've got up to 10 minutes. We just need your name and address to get us started.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Thompson. I'm an attorney here in Des Moines. My address is at 4214 Fleur Drive. I'm a sole practitioner.
Cool.
I just want to give a quick rundown of the facts behind this situation for your information. Mr. Reeser purchased this property in 2001. Mr. Reeser is here back there in the back row. At that time, the property had an old Victorian farmhouse, a detached garage, a barn, and a fairly new shop building, which is the subject of this appeal. It's in unincorporated, or it was in unincorporated Warren County at that time, and had a Norwalk mailing address, which I think it still may. In 2009, it was annexed by the city of Des Moines. In about 2013, while Mr. Reeser was traveling on business, the house was vandalized. It was actually largely demolished by his then stepson. Pipes were broken, walls were broken out. It was completely trashed, so he couldn't live in it. And because it was deemed to be a family matter, the insurer wouldn't pay. So he had this hulk of a house that he couldn't live in, and couldn't get money from the insurer to rebuild. So he boarded it up at that time, hoping in time to be able to afford to renovate it. Unfortunately, because it was vacant, it was uninsurable, and there was no insurance on the property. And although he did his best to secure the property, people broke in, and eventually a fire broke out and the house was destroyed, as was previously mentioned. About that same time, Mr. Reeser had a series of work-related accidents that rendered him unable to work for a while and unable to put any money into the property to try to improve it. And the time therefore for rebuilding the house expired without him being able to rebuild that prior house. However, now he's in a position to improve the property, and he would like to convert the existing shop building into a residence, as was mentioned earlier. We're appreciative of staff's position on the exception for the 10-acre requirement, and unless any board members have questions on that, I'll just skip over that and go on to the variances. Sure. As mentioned, the two variances relate to the setback on the side property line, and also to the paved drive. And as I'm sure you all know, the conditions and the requirements, the criteria for allowing a variance. The first is you have to have no reasonable return without the variance on the property. Here, Mr. Reeser bought the property with a house on it. That was included in the purchase price, was a house. For him now to, with that house gone and no insurance money, to have to build a second house would be economically unfeasible. He would end up losing money on the property. Instead of a reasonable return, he would get no return. There'd be a loss. I would compare this to some of the earlier cases you had just today, a couple sign cases where apparently the standard is the same. You have to have no reasonable return is possible on the property. And item 1 today was a sign in the East Village, I think, and of course the Merle Hay Mall case just a few moments ago. Apparently there's at least inherently a determination that without that sign variance, there's no way to make money on Merle Hay Mall. If that's true, then certainly Mr. Reeser has an argument here that there's no reasonable return on this property. And of course, he's not a huge corporation. He's just a single individual who's trying to enjoy the property he bought. He's trying to make the best of a bad situation with no guarantee of a profitable return. We maintain that this clearly meets the first test, which is a lack of a reasonable return without the variance. The second, of course, is that the plight of the owner is not due to his own fault. It can't be of his own making. And here, as I said, there was the vandalism, there was the fire that broke out, probably as a result of arson, his multiple personal injuries, and the annexation by the city itself, all come together in a sort of series of unfortunate events for him to make it impossible for him to realize a reasonable return on the property without this variance, or these variances. The final criterion is that the use to be authorized by the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality of the land in question. And here the variances being requested will not change the character of the locality at all. In fact, it will preserve the character of the locality. That shop building has been there since 1995. I would like to point out that it is a modern building. It's got plumbing, insulation, electrical, everything. He's not just trying to convert some ancient, chicken coop to turn it into a residence. It is a house. And I would clarify that he's not seeking to add a second story. I'm not sure where that thought came from. He's just wanting to convert this building, 32 by 32, which won't be large, obviously. It'd be a one-bedroom house, to convert it into a residence. For example, on the setback issue, there's no denying that it's only 7 feet from the property line, but the building will be there either way. He doesn't intend to tear the building down if the variance is requested. So that setback requirement is going to be violated either way. Here, leaving a building in place is in keeping with the current character of the neighborhood. Adding something new would change the character or alter it, as the term is used in the standards. This is especially true given that the adjacent property is part of the right-of-way for the Highway 5 bypass. There's no neighbor next door who's going to be bothered by this property being next to the property line or being so close, and it doesn't impact any of the other residents of the neighborhood. Similarly, on the paved drive issue, the use of the existing unpaved drive would be very much in keeping with the essential character of the neighborhood as it currently exists. I actually drove through the neighborhood this morning up and down Border Street, and within about a quarter of a mile or so on either side of his property, I counted a total of 10 driveways, including his, and none of them are paved. It's a gravel road with gravel driveways. It's not clear what the point would be to have paved driveways if you have to drive over a mile of gravel road to get to them, just to get home. His house would actually sort of stick out from the rural character of the neighborhood if he was the only one in the area with a paved drive. So we feel that allowing the continued use of the existing gravel drive will not alter the character of the neighborhood in any way. Finally, I would note that the staff recommendation concludes by stating that conversion of a utility outbuilding into a dwelling would not be within the essential character of the surrounding area. First of all, I don't think that statement's necessarily true. It would depend on the nature of the building being converted. It would depend on the quality and extent of the work being done. It's certainly possible to take an existing outbuilding of some sort and through renovations make it indistinguishable from any other single-family residence. It's also particularly true in this neighborhood. Just across the street, there's a house that I believe was built by design to look like a barn. I don't think it's a conversion, but It's got the gambrel roof that a barn has. It's got the little cupolas on top that barns often have. I mean, if you drive by and look at it, you say, oh, it looks like a barn, but it's clearly a house. So in this particular neighborhood, converting an outbuilding like this to a home would not alter the character of the neighborhood. So in conclusion, he bought this property nearly 20 years ago seeking a quiet rural residence, and due to the unfortunate events I discussed, he's not really been able to enjoy the property he purchased, at least in recent years. Without the variances requested, he will be deprived of any reasonable return on the property, and the variances requested in this case will tend far more to preserve the character of the neighborhood than to alter it. We respectfully request that the variances be granted. This would allow the spirit of the zoning chapter of the code to be observed and substantial justice to be done as is stated in the code. And again, we feel like if, that sign in item 1 on today's agenda, if that is an undue hardship for a business to have a sign that, can't go on to an adjacent occupant space, then clearly this has to be a hardship. He's got his life savings tied up in this property. He's just wanting to live on it, and it's far more of a hardship than this or the possibility of Merlehain Mall having to use a slightly different sign for one of its entrances. So I think my 10 minutes may be about up. That's why I went so fast. So I'll go sit down unless any of you have questions for me.
You have 55 seconds left, but if you're okay, we'll, sure. Does the board have questions for Mark? Mark, I just have a brief one here, and I think you referenced this, it might have been assumed, but in your last minute or so, I think you said the owner of the property plans to live there in the residence.
Yes.
And the question about, or the statement about the second story, that was a question that I had. A lot of times applicants will show us like a profile drawing, what they want to do. But the idea is he's not going to expand the footprint of the building. He's not going to add on to the top.
No.
So from an exterior perspective, frankly, it may not look a lot different when it's done. Is that
Exactly.
correct?
It already has like a brick facade. It's not actual brick, it's vinyl that looks like brick. I mean, it looks a lot like a residence.
Small
already.
house to begin
Yeah,
with.
exactly.
Okay, all right. I do, and I appreciate your presentation, some good points. I believe that each case certainly has to rely on its own merits, even when it is related to, variance conditions. There are some concerns I do have with this case. We've got 7 acres. We got plenty of room to do all kinds of stuff under the A1 requirements. We know where it's going under the new ordinance. What I would probably want to see here is if this would be allowed, that we don't have any further expansion on the property that would not be in conformance with, the future zoning ordinance. Because we can easily get into, hey, now that I fixed up my house, now I want to put a garage over there. And maybe that's going to be too close. And then we just kick the can down the road. And when it really is time to have a business park here, when he gets some good rate of return on that, people are going to start scratching their heads.
Yeah.
So what would you say to, what's the future of this property then? Is he going to continue to ask for exceptions or variances down the road from the zoning ordinance beyond this?
I'm not aware of any future plans. And I just wanted to point out, we mentioned this in the statement he submitted, but I didn't mention it just now. The topography of this property is a little unusual. On the west side, maybe the western 30%, it's fairly flat, but most of the eastern part is a huge hill that goes up, and there's really not a lot you can do there in terms of like agriculture or something. You couldn't drive a combine up that hill to save your life.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what it looks like when you slide by there. I've checked it out before. He's got some nice trails there you can have fun on.
So I'm not aware of any intended future uses. This was his retirement home, and he's wanting to live there.
Gotcha. And to the best of your knowledge, and he can just shake his head, East Border Street, Beardsley Street is not a paved street at this time,
No, it is
correct?
not.
Because I know we've spent very little to no time on the non-paved driveway aspect here, but it's not a paved road at this time.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody here to speak in support of the applicant's request? All right. Seeing none, anybody here to speak in opposition? Seeing none, do we have any further questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public portion and go to board deliberation. What do you guys think?
This is a tough one.
There are a couple things that I think regardless of our decision here, if we did decide to allow the request, he'd still be required to meet building code. There could be some significant challenges to that. He may decide then this probably isn't the best way to expand or to renovate this, but the building could remain as it is, so. Any other thoughts or motion one way or the other here?
I mean, if the dwelling, if it was allowed, then there would not be an argument for hardship, because there would be a reasonable rate of return of the use of the property, right?
You're saying if the dwelling was allowed?
If we took staff recommendations, right? And so that would allow the
Which is
residential
denied.
dwelling, right?
Yeah.
And so that the hardship argument for the paved driveway and the setbacks would sort of go away, right? Because there would be a reasonable use of return on the property.
One could see it that way.
Yeah.
I would make a motion to go with the staff recommendations on both the exception and the variances.
Okay.
Approve the exception, but deny the variances.
Okay.
So we want to make him pave his driveway? Nobody else in the neighborhood's got a paved driveway?
I struggle with that.
Driving off of a gravel road onto
It's a
a paved,
gravel road. There's no other paved driveways. That doesn't make sense to me.
I mean,
Well, that's actually one of the reasons I asked that question, to get that on the table. We have had cases before where we've had paved city streets where they wanted to retain a lengthy gravel driveway, and we've said like pave the first 25 feet up through the right of way.
That makes sense.
Yeah, in a case like this, we don't have an improved road. I don't think tomorrow we're going to have an office park. That's 200 feet. I think we'd be taking the spirit and intent and kind of beating up on people with that. Unless we want to have something where he has to pave the driveway at such time the street is paved, but then Sue Ann or whoever follows her up, because that might be a few years from now, would probably have to look at enforcing that.
but then we're going to make all the other neighbors pave their driveways too? No.
But if they didn't ask for variances or exceptions for other things, it wouldn't have kicked them into that too. That's kind of one of those deals to bring up non-conforming sites, but I get what you
I
mean,
wouldn't
Dave.
hold that against him.
Yeah.
And not expect everyone else to follow suit either, so.
Right.
I mean, I think it just needs to be reasonable. Obviously, he's had some unfortunate circumstances. And it sounds to me like all he wants to do is move into this building.
Right. The biggest issue for me is if
Make it
he
his
had
home.
made a significant improvement, like again, adding stories or, put $250,000 in this little footprint and it's 7 foot from the property line. I don't think that would be wise for anybody, but it sounds like it'll be a minimum. It probably won't look a whole lot different than what we've got now. It wouldn't be a big change.
Because I'd just like to suggest that we make a friendly amendment and not require the paving.
We do have a motion to deny that and require the paving. I can ask if that would be a second then, Dave? Are you saying you'd vote to second the exception of the lot area?
No, I'm not seconding, but what I would do is
Okay.
I would like for us to at least consider not paving. So that would be
Okay.
a suggestion that we consider incorporating into the,
Yeah. We might have to see if the current motion gets a second as is, or if you would be open. Is that where you're staking your claim, Marlis? And you don't have to,
Yeah, I just
Get into
need to
that.
start over, I guess. Yeah,
well, that's okay too.
I'm sticking with that.
Okay, so just procedurally then, so Marlis is moving staff recommendations as presented. Would there be a second for her motion? Okay, there's no second, so that motion fails. Okay, so would there be an alternative, either, motion for denial or approval?
If we only do the exception and the second variance, it doesn't really matter to him. That's not,
Right.
like, there's no,
Use of the house.
yeah,
Right.
right? So
Yep. Yep.
practically
Yeah,
speaking,
which
there's no
one
reason.
drives the issue?
Yeah,
Right.
I think we should figure out whether we want to allow him to do that or
Right.
not.
Right, yeah. Fundamentally, I have a problem with 7 acres, and we want to cram something up 7 foot from a property line, yeah, I already have a building there that can stay there. So if I was to look at, big picture impacts in the area, fundamentally I'd be opposed to it, but impact-wise, it's little to no impact. It is what it is. It's not going to look any different. And I don't know if we could do this, but I want to say, I don't want to see you with any other expansion of this house, no other additions, no add-ons, as almost if you want this, then we want that in return, so that we don't further take away the intended reuse in the future, so that the impact's minimal. So long-winded, can we do a thing like that?
Well, what you will have is this will not be able to expand without conformance with the new zoning ordinance that is going to be placed there. So pretty much this is limiting it to what it is.
And by default, like legally, even if he wanted to do something else, he'd probably have to come back to us or our future, whoever's on this board and ask anyway. So it might be a moot point, even though in principle, I'd want to see it. He couldn't expand it further because he'd still be violating the ordinance.
Right.
And yeah, so to do any sort of, we don't give temporary variances, but in this case, the effect of it will be, essentially, it'll be temporary in the sense of he won't be able to actually utilize a single-family dwelling in any other capacity beyond just this very limited usage because of the new zoning restrictions.
Right.
Okay. Well, Dave, do you want to try?
So, okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the requested exception, the minimum lot allowed, and we also, I don't think he needs to pave the driveway, and I'm okay with not enforcing the setback. Let's just let the guy live there.
Is your reasoning that it won't alter the essential character of the surrounding area?
Yeah,
And,
it's already there, and it is what it is.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I think we just let it go.
And whether I do or don't want to give Mr. Thompson credit for his arguments, basically, it's not going to look any different than it was before.
Right,
It's not going to change the character of the neighborhood. Nobody's going to notice it.
exactly.
Okay. All right, so we got a motion to grant the requested exception and variances. Would there be a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all right, so we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? 1, 2. Okay, so it takes 4 to pass at any time. So you've got 4. So what I would advise you to do is you work closely with city staff on those building permits, because you're still going to have those, and we can't grant exemptions for that. So I'm sorry to hear what happened down there, and I wish you well. All right, you guys have a good afternoon. Okay, item 7. Thanks. I think somebody's trying to have a private conversation by ducking into that room. And okay, item 7 is an exception request at 1006 39th Street.
Item number 7 is a proposal to build a new garage structure on the southeastern portion of this lot. The subject property is located at the northwest corner of School Street and 39th Street. The applicant recently purchased a small lot that was in existence. So they've owned this L-shaped property for some time, but in the last year they've bought this small corner to square off their property. As I mentioned, they're wanting to build a detached garage in this area here, which would be accessed by a driveway from School Street. As you can see from the site sketch, this garage would be, on here they say 17 feet, but in their write-up they mentioned that it would be 16 feet from that south property line, and then it would be 30 feet back from the front property line along 39th Street. So they need exceptions to the front yard setbacks for both of these. And then the garage itself would be 1.5 stories tall with a maximum height of 21 feet. So they need an exception of a 1/2 story over the allowed 1 story, and then an exception of 4 feet over the allowed 17 feet of height for an accessory structure. And then the 5th appeal is for an exception of 8 feet less than the minimum required 24 feet of maneuvering for the garage. Since the garage doors would face School Street, they would only have 16 feet of maneuvering on the private property They can't use or count School Street for meeting their maneuvering space. Here's a photo of the house as it appears today. And again, the new garage would be located in this general vicinity. You can see that they currently have a one-car garage at the northwest corner of the property. This is a photo taken of the corner. You can see this is the area that they just recently purchased, and they would be putting the garage in that general location. Similar photo. Another angle. And then this is looking down the alley. You can see they have a fenced-in area on the south part of the property line. And here's the consent map. There were 4 cards that came back, all in support. Staff looked at the design of the garage, and we felt that the 1.5-story design is appropriate for this Drake neighborhood area, which includes a lot of taller garages. It's really in character with the existing house that's on the property. However, we just didn't feel that it's in keeping with the character of the neighborhood to put the garage more or less in the front yard area along School Street. The character of the Drake neighborhood is that the garages are located at the rear of the properties, often accessed by alleys, or in this case, there's an existing driveway from 39th Street that gets to that existing one-car garage. So we felt that it was more appropriate to allow them to build the proposed garage in this northwest corner. And I know that's not their desire. Their first priority would be to build it here, but staff believes that it'd be more appropriate to put the 1.5-story garage there at the northwest corner of the lot rather than the southeast. So staff has recommended denial of the 2 exceptions to the front yard setbacks along School and 39th Streets, but we have recommended approval of the 2 exceptions to allow the 1.5-story garage. And then we've also recommended approval of an alternative exception, and that was for 8 feet less than the minimum required 24 feet of maneuvering space. That would allow them to slide the garage closer to that alley, because you can use alleys widths to provide or to meet the minimum maneuvering space. So if it's a 14-foot wide alley, in order to provide 24 feet of maneuvering, they would have to build the garage at least 10 feet back from that property line. In this case, we thought it would be appropriate to allow them to slide the garage within 2 feet of that property line so that they would have a total of 16 feet of maneuvering. So again, we have recommended approval of the appeals to put the garage in this area within 2 feet of the property line. So.
Hey, Bert?
Yeah.
Are these the properties that, in this photo here, you have these squares that are along the alley, are those garages from neighbors?
Yeah, those are garages on the other properties.
Right.
You can see from the aerial, it looks like this property has the driveway from School Street. This one, just to the north, has the driveway from the alley, but it's a side-loaded garage.
And Bert, I don't know that you had mentioned this, but is that an above-ground pool that's in that fenced area, or?
I don't know if it's still there. I'll let the applicant explain that.
Sure.
There's a fence around it, so without sticking the camera over the fence, we don't know.
Which, yeah, you're not supposed to do that, right? And would it be the applicant's intent, if we would grant the variances they've requested, would they retain that other single-car garage on the other side? Would they keep that? Or do you know?
I believe that's their intent.
Okay.
They're all exceptions. So if you would grant the exceptions as requested and they constructed the garage here, I believe they would still keep that one
They
car
would still,
garage.
okay. And the new garage the garage doors would face to the south and access from School Street, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okay, anything else for Bert? Okay. And if you don't mind, Bert, would you leave their drawing there of their intended,
Sure.
what they'd like to do? So we can take a peek at that, okay. All right. Okay, applicant or representative of the applicant, it's you guys' turn. Sure. You have 10 minutes, so as long as you can share your time. We'll just need both of your names and your addresses as appropriate.
My name is Julie Red. And my address is 1006 39th Street.
I'm Kenneth Red, my address is 10006 39th Street.
Okay.
So, what you guys were talking about in that garage, I want it here, because first off, right back here, we'd have to take down a big tree, plus tear down this garage, so you can put our garage there. And if we left it here, they originally had suggested that we enter from this way, you couldn't make the turn past my house.
Right.
And then if you take this garage where they're putting it now, we've got less than 5 feet from the back of our house, so then I have to tear off my deck that I have here. So I've got a deck around here, a big tree here, and then this little garage. That's why I don't want to put it there. Before we even bought this, it took us 8 years to get this property. We've been trying to buy it, and I'll show you a picture of the guy who used to own it, if you think, it was a terrible eyesore. I got pictures of it. We've been married 39 years, so we argue a lot. And I'm always wrong.
Well, you've learned over time.
Exactly. But before we even bought this property, all the neighbors were trying to get us to buy it. And other people were looking at buying it for a dog park or a garden. And I said, well, I'd like to put up a garage here. And every single neighbor told me they would be fine with a garage there. I don't know what you guys have found out from the things you've mailed out, but I had people coming over as soon as we bought it and said, man, that's going to be a nice place for a garage. So I don't think anybody will have a problem with that garage being there. I went and measured the driveways across the street from us on this view. They're 16 feet. They're 16 feet, the variance we're asking for. They're all the same. The only difference is they're not on the corner. The garage is behind them. But our garage would face the other garages like the ones that are sitting facing us. I don't think it would look terrible. I'm going to put 2 dormers, one on each side of it, so it looks like it's more of a house than a garage. But
Okay.
I have really been trying to get this. I've lived in this house for 27, 28 years. Her mother lives next door to us. I grew up on 29th in school. We've been in this area our entire lives. And I don't want to leave it, and I've had one of this garage since I moved in this house. That little single car does me no good. Matter of fact, our vehicles won't even fit in it. So we're just asking that you guys would really consider letting us put it in that front yard. I don't think, it's not going to stick out past our house hardly at all. The only thing it's going to do is block my view from my porch. So it's, I don't think it's going to be an eyesore. And if you go down the street a block, you'll find a brick building. It's a commercial building, doesn't bother a thing, and I've never heard anybody complain about that building. So we're just really hoping that you guys let us do this, and I'll let my wife do some talking. She's better at it than me.
My only issue is if we, I don't know where the drawing is of the garage that we currently have.
Right here.
Well, they can't see it though.
Yeah, just lay it over top. There you go.
If we build a 2-car garage, or are allowed to build one there, then we have a driveway that runs up the entire side of our house that goes to the back of a garage that we can't,
Right.
because the access is now going to be from the front alley. And we can't access it coming in around that way, because that was definitely an option that we wanted. And we have 2 very mature trees in our backyard, which means we're going to have to take out one of the 2 trees that we have back there in addition to, but we would like to keep this garage. Part of the deal is this becomes his garage for him to use, and then we would maintain that and keep that for the garage that I would use and have access to.
But your cars don't fit in it now. That's what he says.
Well, because he's
All
got
his stuff.
stuff's in there.
It's not because it's too small.
No, it's
No, it's
just
because
really narrow. It's one garage door, so.
Sure, it's a Model A garage,
Yes,
yeah.
it's one garage door.
So you would want to retain, is your current driveway paved?
It's blacktopped.
It's blacktop. Okay, so you'd want to retain that so you can park in your own garage.
Yes.
Instead of a she shed, it's a she garage. Okay.
keep my garage.
And then on the new garage that you want to place, I noticed that your Menards drawing, if I can call it that, whoever did, it looked pretty simple. If we were inclined to grant this, you're talking about having some dormers on the shingled sides and maybe a few more windows
Yeah,
to
we're
just
gonna
dress
have-
up the.
Not about windows on the ends.
Yeah.
And then we put a dormer on each side of it,
Right.
Inside the pitch or the roof. So yeah,
Okay.
that's our plan.
You mean gable? The gable, not a dormer.
No, we're having a dormer. Where you,
Yeah,
it'll be
yeah.
a window in that dormer.
On each side
each
of
side
the
of
flat
it.
side,
And it
right?
should be, I think, right now they're saying 6 feet, but I'd even see if I can get a little.
So one would face 39th and one would face the backyard for your dormers
Yes.
then, if I got it right?
Yes.
Okay. And do you still have is that a swimming pool?
Yes, that's above ground swimming pool.
And you want to retain that?
Yes.
Because if that wasn't there, you could move.
We'd have no
We have
issue.
we have so many family members and kids that swim in our pool. I never get in it. I don't care if it's, but they do use it a lot.
Okay. And you'd be prepared to pave a double wide driveway onto School Street
Yes.
then and do that within the engineering standards of the city? Okay.
I know I'd have to have footings and all that stuff
Right.
under there, so I just really would like to have it there. That would solve everything for us.
Okay.
Plus, there used to be a 2-story home that existed there for years.
And set closer.
And yeah, that was closer to both 39th Street and School Street, so, and it was never much to look at before, but I think we would maintain it and make it look decent and be something that would fit in with the neighborhood rather than this abandoned lot.
So I'm assuming that home that was there was demolished?
Yes, it caught on fire.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if you'll be able to see this
He
picture.
attempted to rebuild and wasn't able to because of some reason, I don't know. So he's left it abandoned, very upset that he couldn't rebuild,
Turn it?
and he would not,
Yeah, turn your phone. There you go.
he just didn't do much maintenance. The city was called several times to come out and cut down brush and,
And this house right now,
What's
how
that
it
a
looks
picture
there, his house, his old house,
Oh.
that is the best it's ever looked. That thing was
Can't
so
really-
raggedy. You can see it on the screen there.
okay.
It was so raggedy and it was just terrible. He had junk everywhere. I mean, it looked really bad, and people was begging us to buy this house or this lot, and I kept saying, he won't sell it to me. So finally, I got it this year, and I was thinking 100% I was gonna get a garage, and I didn't realize there would be all this kind of stuff to go through.
Okay.
I don't think the garage would look out of place. There's stucco, there's siding, there's vinyl, there's brick, there's everything in my neighborhood, everything. There's not one typical house in that neighborhood. There's 2 stories, there's 1.5 stories, there's 1 story, so.
Kenneth, do you
First-
know- oh,
Go ahead, Justin.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, is there anyone else in that area, in that neighborhood that has 2 garage units?
Yes.
2 garages.
Oh, no, as far as two
separate
garages?
structures.
Separate structures, 2 garage structures, no?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And there's a 2-story garage, so that's really huge. That's not like anybody else's in that neighborhood either. It actually has a big deck on the back and everything. It is literally a 2-story garage.
So part of it is uniqueness over in that area.
We have had cases where, if we're going to have a more obvious either footprint or facade present, especially if it's closer to the setbacks than normally allowed, we do want it to maybe be enhanced visually. So you mentioned the dormer windows. Would you be planning to do like architectural shingles? And for the siding, would you be doing siding that would generally kind of match the type of siding you
Yes,
have now?
yes.
Do you have hardboard siding or what
We
kind
have,
of?
actually, we have steel siding, so we probably have vinyl that would match the same reveals. But it'd be
Okay.
the same. And my bottom of my house is stucco. First
Yeah.
is brick, stucco, and then siding.
Right, okay. Yeah, because it looks like I do like the variety on that one side of your house there. A lot of times vinyl is not a selling point with us, but if it would be maybe done where you have some variety of those materials, maybe
Or
that
it'd
would
be
be.
lap siding or whatever. I don't know if they use the hardy plank anymore, but whatever
Yeah.
it was, it had the same reveal as my house does.
Okay.
So it all looks the same going up.
Okay.
And I am a carpenter, so.
Okay, cool. Well, then we got the right guy. Okay, all right. Anything else you guys want to add? Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay, all right. Well, we got our homework to do then. Thank you both very much. Okay, for formalities, is there anybody else that wishes to speak in support of the applicant? Seeing none, is there anybody that wishes to speak in opposition? Seeing none, any further questions for staff from the board? Anyone else? Okay. If no other questions, we'll close the public portion and go to board deliberation.
I like what they're trying to do. I think it all makes a lot of sense. And it's not a humongous footprint. Oftentimes we get these requests for these 40 by 40 or 30 by 40 or, pole shed sorts of requests. This seems very reasonable. It doesn't seem onerous. It seems like he's willing to make it look residential and match the character of the neighborhood. And in these old neighborhoods, it's tough to always make everything fit into the peg,
Right.
just because of the layout.
Yeah, and in this case, we're looking at an exception level here, if I'm correct. We're not at the variance level.
Right.
And, the applicant has proposed to try to dress this up a little. So perhaps that's something, on Cindy's angle here, if we could work from that, maybe we can make this look as good as possible and meet in the middle. Anybody have any thoughts on how to do that? Like a motion?
I would just, I have to put my 2 cents in, I guess.
Me too.
It's, I don't think it's consistent with the character of the neighborhood. I mean, if you look at the map, most of those garages are in the alley behind the houses. They're accessible from the alley, so.
Yep. That is true.
And no other, at least within that area, there's no other place that has 2 separate
Right, I think they
garage
demonstrated-
buildings.
Oh, excuse me. I think they demonstrated the hardship just by talking about the mature trees that are there. Just the taking out the trees to me is a bigger deal than,
Well, I think the houses directly to the south of them have garages that are actually facing the same direction his is going to face. So although it's going to be in the side yard, front yard, whatever, he's trying to maximize with what he's got to work with. So I'd be inclined to make a motion to try and work through this. Let's let him build the garage. Let's just make sure that the appearance of this is going to fit in with the appearance of the home, so it looks consistent. It sounds like he wants to build a nice garage. He's excited about it, obviously.
Right.
So, and I would be inclined to let him keep the other one. I mean, otherwise we got a driveway to nowhere, and that garage certainly isn't in the way. It's behind a fence, behind the house, up against an alley. So I wouldn't have any problems with that either.
He's allowed by right to have both of them, as I understand it, and the square footage total from both of them is not at issue, so it must be under the restrictions by the city.
Yeah.
so was Dave's a motion?
So, yeah, I'll make a motion, I'm open to suggestions. Mel, if you want to weigh in on the appearance, the building materials,
Sure.
that sort of thing. Bert is the Boy Scout of the
Well, we
day,
had
so he's got his
recommended
stuff.
approval of 3 of the exceptions subject to these conditions. So it's a 5th one, the building code on the back.
Okay.
Right.
And then I guess if you're inclined to do the dormer, then you could say generally with this design, but with the dormer.
Yep. So Dave's motion would be, you'd be granting the requested exceptions, still subject to, generally speaking, these 4, all 5 items, right? So is that your motion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
If
In a friendly amendment
Then-
to add the dormers.
Yeah, then I'll second it with a friendly amendment, but I might want to give a little more detail here. Yeah, I want dormer windows on those north-south sides, centered in the structure, whatever. I'd also want to see that there is at least one window of at least, I think the minimum's like, is it 10 square feet on each of the ends?
Okay.
Because I just don't want to slab in.
Sure, no, that's fine.
And by looking at his house, I'd like to see that those ends that are above the eave and below the gable, the little triangle, I'd like to see that of a different material than the other siding. That's, I think, what their side of their house looks like now.
Okay.
I don't know how to say that, I'm not an architect. But with all of that, as long as it's submitted to the approval of the zoning administrator for those compatible materials. Yeah, yeah. Right, yeah, a different pattern of material, like sometimes it looks like the shake New England siding, and then you get to your horizontal lap. Just something in general, without trying to over-design it.
Just something to break it up.
Yes, exactly, because that is still going to be pretty tall. And to go to what Justin was saying, we do already have one garage there. This is going to be prominent, but for the others as well, yeah, we do have other garages that are on that street face that direction. So that'll be my friendly second with some minor variances. Judy?
Let me go back and just clarify for both the
Yes.
motion and the second. So the first condition that staff has put in
Is
is
out.
we need to remove that. I think I heard 1 through 5.
Right.
One
right.
should be
To be.
removed.
Right.
Is
Right.
that correct for both the mover
Yes,
and the
yes, for
second?
clarification,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it.
So 2 through 5.
Yeah, so 2 through 5, and then item 2 was expanded a little bit with the dormers, end windows, at least one on each end of minimum 10 square feet, and the area above the eave line on the gabled ends.
It has a different finish than what's
Yeah.
below it, yeah.
Okay.
Got that.
All right. Okay, so that'd be the motion and the second. Unless there's any questions, all those in favor of the requested exemption, subject to the recommendations, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? 1, 2. Okay. Your motion does carry. It always takes 4, so you got it. But keep improving your corner of that neighborhood. We're glad your family's staying there, and we're glad you're staying in Des Moines.
I do have the trust drawings and have the dormers on it.
Yeah, just go over those with staff briefly, and you should be in good shape. So, thanks for waiting today. Have a good afternoon. Okay, we have a little business to do here yet. Should we just do the minutes first, Bert, before we get into the ordinance? And then can I do we keep the hearing open since we are aboard? All right, so I won't gavel out.
Well present.
All right, well, let's go ahead and do the minutes of the last meeting. Everybody was here at the last meeting. If you've reviewed those, would there be a motion for any
Mr. Chair, I'll
approval?
approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Second.
Second by Marlis. All those in favor that was here last month, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 5-0 on that one. Okay, so minutes are approved, so now we get to a review of the city's new zoning ordinance, right?
All right, yeah, as you know, or may not know, the new zoning ordinance took effect over the weekend, so the city is now operating under the new zoning ordinance. We have Michael Ludwig, the planning administrator, here to give an overview of what the new ordinance means. So.
Cool.
Yeah, that'd be good. If you bear with me 1 second, I'm going to pull up the presentation.
Thanks. Sure.
Computer needs to update.
Never fails.
Didn't want to interrupt your discussion.
No.
Snuck up here and,
Well, while that's updating, I was privileged to be on the steering committee to look at Plan DSM and the zoning ordinance, and I'm certainly no expert on it, but I want to give credit to our city council, city manager, the staff, and specifically to Mike, because somebody's got to kind of carry the water, carry the ball on it, and sometimes take the punches, and Mike has seen this thing through. For anybody that's in urban planning, adopting a new comprehensive plan and a new zoning ordinance, sometimes that is in essence the pinnacle of a career. So I want to give Mike credit for seeing this through. He doesn't look like he's aged very much, but it can certainly age a person going through all this. So credit to Mike and all of his colleagues, Sue Ann and all the other staff who were involved in this. It was an incredible thing, and I think it's a great vision for our city, but it's going to take all of us a little time to get familiar with this. So this is a good start for us to have you talk.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for your comments. Again, Michael Ludwig, Planning Administrator for the City of Des Moines. Yeah, this has been really a very monumental time for the City of Des Moines. If you realize that between the last 5 years, we've adopted a new comprehensive plan, our first city freestanding master transportation plan for the entire city. We've adopted a new Parks and Recreation master plan for the city, a new revitalization strategy, investment strategy for our neighborhoods, Invest DSM, and then a zoning code, planning and design code, and new citywide zoning map, all in a period of 5 years. That is, in any city, it doesn't matter where you're at, that is a busy 5 years for a city to go through. And I think, realistically, when you put those plans in place with the council strategic plan and the adoption of the local option sales tax by our voters, we are poised as a city to make great progress by our goal of 2040 as was established in this Plan DSM. So it is a very, very exciting time to be a part of this city and to see, it's been exciting my entire career here. There's always been something going on. But I just feel like with all of these plans interlocked and the vision going forward being very unified, we are very poised for great success in this city. And I just want to thank our boards, our commissions, the council, our steering committee, the staff that worked on this. I stood up at a lot of the meetings, but Catherine was working on Plan DSM website and working on the code revisions and trying to keep up with all the changes that were being made. In the meantime, work's got to get done while we're working on a code also, right? So there's Board of Adjustment cases, Historic Commission cases, planning cases, all that continue to get processed, and we did not take one step back, did not take one pause in processing any of those applications during that entire time. And that is just, it's just a monumental feat. And so it's a testament to the people that I work with on a daily basis, the professionals that they are, and that the level of competency that they have to do their jobs on a daily basis with very minimal direction. When I'm pulled off to be doing other things, they know what to do and they get it done. And they've been great people to work with, and I'm very, very proud of them. So with that, I just want to give you a quick overview of the zoning code process, a little bit about the comp plan. We do have some new board members on here, and so take you back about 5 years a little bit just so you can understand where we've been and where we're headed. And then I'll open up to any questions that you may have. And again, just thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So Plan DSM, Bert, can I go to just the screen presentation here?
On that?
Yeah, I don't need the next slide, Joe. There we go. So again, Plan DSM was the name we gave to our comprehensive plan update that we did for the city 5 years ago. There were a lot of different plans that influenced the creation of that document, and probably at the top of that and on the top of this chart was the Tomorrow Plan that was done for the region, the Des Moines region. But we also had a number of other things that influenced that plan. So you had the state planning principles that are adopted in the state code, which are referenced in our staff reports every time. The APA, American Planning Association, Sustaining Places, Capital Crossroads, the DART Transportation or Transit Plan, AARP, Livable Communities, and the Age-Friendly Greater Des Moines Initiative. So what we tried to do was there was a lot of great planning that had been done in all these different documents, but the goals and the policies were all in different documents. And what we really tried to do with Plan DSM was bring those all into a single document and avoid any conflict or conflicting goals or principles, and tried to roll those into an overall vision for our city. And I think we successfully completed that. So just so you understand how kind of all these things work together, we kind of consider Plan DSM to be the umbrella for the city. And if you think about all these other things that fall under that umbrella, you have this council strategic plan, which took initiatives and priorities out of Plan DSM and said, okay, these are the top priorities and these are what we're going to provide funding for. That enabled us to work on the next level of projects after we adopted the comp plan. And so you'll see on the left, we have the zoning code, MOVE DSM, that was the transportation master plan. the Invest Neighborhood, or the Invest DSM, which is the neighborhood plan, Live DSM. And then also in this is coordinating our CIP, our capital improvement project budget, and making sure that is aligning with the goals and the principles that are carried in the comp plan. And for a lot of years, the comp plan addressed a lot of community character, but there really wasn't a very strong link to transportation in that 2020 plan, as strong of a link as we needed. And so that was one major improvement that was made throughout Plan DSM, was that link to land use and transportation in a plan and in unified and pointing in the same direction. And then also under Move DSM, you had the Connect Downtown effort that was a specific area effort for downtown and improving walkability. So these were just general elements. They followed the state planning principles in the state code. So again, not just land use, not just urban design, but transportation, housing, all of these different issues. The major directions of that plan were we wanted to pursue directed growth and redevelopment. We know that with a limited budget, we can't grow every direction all the time, anytime. We have to be very, very strategic about our investment of those resources. We need to maximize the utilization of our existing infrastructure to the best that we can. We need to look at areas where we can make, minor improvements to that infrastructure to get the biggest return. And then we need to be looking at things that are supporting our transportation, our transit network, and proposing urban solutions for urban issues, which Des Moines has. We are very unique in Iowa. There are other metro areas, but there's only one state capital, and it's sitting right in the middle of our city, right in the middle of our downtown. We have the most urban downtown core in the state. We have the largest growing metro in the area, and we face different issues in Des Moines than other cities in the state face. And so we have to focus on how can we present urban solutions to urban issues. And then obviously I mentioned this, but the return on investment for our public infrastructure is a really key initiative out of the Plan DSM effort. Again, not saying you can't go put infrastructure in different areas, but we need to be evaluating what the return on that investment is going to be and making sure we're trying to maximize that. Because if we're not here long-term sustainable as a city financially, we're not going to be able to provide the services long-term for our citizens that are the most vulnerable and need those services. So we need to do every day our best job to make sure that we are maximizing that return on those limited taxpayer dollars. So why a new code? As you're well aware, our old code had over 300 revisions to it. It was not very user-friendly. Obviously conflicting provisions. I'll give you an example of one that we had that our staff's heard multiple times. We had very minimal design standards in the code, and the processes were very inefficient. To give you an example, you'll probably recall a developer came to you for Mercy housing in downtown Des Moines. They wanted to add on some apartment units up at the Mercy College. And when they came in, they were in a downtown overlay district. The underlying zoning was C2. So the overlay district was saying, build that building addition out to the street, get it as close to the street as possible. But the underlying zoning was saying, put it back 25 feet. And so when they came, they wanted to build it out to the street, but because we had the conflict in the code, they were forced to come to the Board of Adjustment and seek a variance, which you granted, for the 25 feet setback to comply with the downtown overlay district. And then our previous code required them to go to the Plan and Zoning Commission for a multifamily site plan review. And they went to the Urban Design Review Board for a financial assistance package. So that one project that was building what we wanted, where we wanted, and in a design that we wanted, had to go through about 90 days of public hearing process to get approved to do just what we wanted them to do. And then that's a problem with the code if that's occurring. So under this new code, I'll show you in a few minutes, there's no longer a multifamily site plan review by the Planning Commission. If it's on a transit corridor and it's supporting our transit goals, it's a by right review, administrative review by staff now. As far as the conflicts and setbacks, those have been eliminated in this code. There's no longer the overlay districts that are conflicting with the underlying zoning, so we've eliminated the need to seek a relief from the board or the planning commission to a setback requirement in this code for that project. And then I think most importantly, the code is just easier to use and read and find information in, and we think it will help spur development in this city. So we're very, very excited. Just prior to the start of the whole project, we held some stakeholder meetings. I listed where those different stakeholder meetings were. It resulted in a project direction report, and part of that report is what you see in the structure of this code today about separating out design from land use zoning or use of a property, and distinctly separating those into two separate chapters of the code. I think, again, that was very, very critical. We had history for about, 20 plus years. I think 1998 was our first design overlay district that the city adopted. It was the Neighborhood Pedestrian Commercial District for Ingersoll Avenue, and that established site plan review for commercial uses in that corridor by the Plan and Zoning Commission, and it moved things that were typically viewed as bulk regulations in zoning for that district into a site plan chapter that the Planning Commission had purview over. So that concept for that one district 20 years ago is basically how our code is structured now in our new code. We have moved things that were typically bulk regulations into a design chapter that has purview of staff and the Plan and Zoning Commission. And so it wasn't just the NPC district. We did follow that up with multiple other districts, but we have a 20-year history in Des Moines of moving towards this direction of this new code. So it's very incremental. It's taken time, but we finally are there. And we, as of Sunday, we have a code that's effective. So it's pretty amazing. Just a quick overview of the structure of the two chapters. So you'll see that under zoning chapter 134 now, you pretty much have districts. So you still have a zoning map that has districts defined on it. And those districts are in the zoning chapter. There are use tables in this chapter, or in this code, chapter 134. And I think the key improvement you'll see in the code on that is that they're now in tables rather than lists in the districts. And I think it's much easier to find a use and what district it's allowed in and compare across districts in this new code. Wireless telecommunications are still in the zoning code chapter. So we've been preempted, you're well aware, we've been preempted by state and federal law on a lot of the telecommunications regulations in the last 5 years. I think the states amended theirs twice, and I at least twice, and I know that the feds have adjusted theirs twice at least. So the regulations that are in the new code are exactly what was approved about 6 months ago, 8 months ago, which was an update to our city code on the telecommunication regs. And so they are compliant with the federal and the state regulations for those facilities. Signs are still in the zoning code chapter. We felt that the Board of Adjustment probably had the most expertise in dealing with sign issues. You're obviously very aware that we can't regulate content, and you have to focus on the types of sign it is. You can't define a sign by what it says. So we used to have neighborhood signs in our code. Well, the only way you knew it was a neighborhood sign if it said the neighborhood on the sign, which was reading content. So neighborhood sign isn't listed in this code anymore. We've dropped out all of those conflicting kind of content-based regulations that were in our old code, have been eliminated in this, and we're regulating by sign type that is non-content regulated. And I think you'll find that was probably one of our most confusing sections of the code from a staff administration standpoint, and probably the public coming to you and you interpreting that ordinance in the past. It was broken up by district. You had different sign regulations for each district. And if somebody asked me how our permit and development staff found the same section of the code twice in one day when a question came up, I don't know how they did it, because literally you would get done answering a question and you'd be like, now how did I get to that point in the code? Where did I find that? It was just very, very non-user friendly at the time. There are still review and approval procedures spelled out in there. Some of those include non-conforming uses, which you'll still have review over, and also that includes conditional use reviews in this code. So under the new code, we do have regulations for short-term rentals, for example. So everybody refers to Airbnb. That's a platform of short-term rentals. There are other platforms that are out there. Airbnb gets thrown out there because that's one of the most popular platforms. But short-term rental regulations are in the zoning chapter of the code. So in the past, we've not allowed short-term rentals. We know they exist. You're going to be seeing a lot of applications coming in to legalize short-term rentals across the city. And so those regulations will be applying, and you'll be determining whether or not to grant a conditional use for those short-term rentals.
To be clear, this is already legalized. We would just be deciding specific sites whether they could be.
Compliance with the regulations and locations. So it still requires a conditional use permit so you have to go through your conditional use permit criteria and the criteria specific to a short-term rental. Now, shortly after the start of the year, January 6th, we are going to be having a public meeting about some amendments to the short-term rental regulations. And council has directed us to prepare some revisions that are a little bit more flexible on not requiring owner occupancy of a short-term rental and reducing some of the limits on the number of days a year it can be rented out. So we are going to be presenting those. So we already have regulations in the code, and we're going to be very shortly amending those. So ideally, we'd rather have those amendments done before we have a bunch of applications considered, but we'll have to handle them as they come in. But Sue's working on that. January 6th is going to be the public information meeting on those amendments, and then we will process those through the Plan and Zoning Commission and the City Council so that they can be amended into the code that became effective this past Sunday and was amended on Monday night. So a few moving parts in there, but I think for the most part it's fairly clear.
And Mike, just real quick, and not to get into the weeds on detail and slow you down, but for those, quote, Airbnbs or VRBOs, do you predict that, like hopefully like anything else, a new business will come ask? Then that would come to us for a conditional use permit. But what about pre-existing ones?
Well, without a conditional use permit, they've been illegal under the code, so they would for their best interest, they'd want to come in and get that conditional use permit approved. Okay. And then the other part of that is that the reason we made it a conditional use permit is that just like with the liquor licenses, which are still in the separation requirements for the bars, taverns, and that are still in the zoning chapter.
Yep.
If it becomes a nuisance, we can bring that back to the Board of Adjustment, and the board could revoke their conditional use permit, and they'd have to cease operating the Airbnb or the short-term rental. So, there was a balancing of concerns in the public, right? People wanted to recognize this is happening, and it's probably providing a needed amenity in the community, but there's also the concern about impacts on neighborhoods and that these can have. So with a transient type population using that, it's basically a hotel in a residential neighborhood. So we want to make sure that we're addressing neighborhood impacts.
Gotcha.
And the best way we thought we could do that was to kind of treat it similarly to the beer, wine, and liquor sales requirements and have it be a conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you very much.
So on Chapter 135, which is now design, think of this as Plan and Zoning Commission's bailiwick now under this code, okay? So we have building types. Those building types are kind of the form of the building. So a use is still regulated under zoning, but that use has to be in a building type under this new code. And there's building types per district. Not every building type is allowed in every district, but they can easily find out what's allowed by looking at the code. We have regulations, the design requirements are in that chapter. Parking has been moved into that, just so you know. A lot of things that used to come to the Board of Adjustment are now the purview of staff, not even the Plan and Zoning Commission. So when people used to have to come to you and ask for relief to a drive aisle width or a parking stall dimension or a number of spaces, Those in this new code have been delegated to the staff to regulate in consultation with our engineering staff, city engineer, and traffic engineer. And, you know, for the reality of it, the difference between 6 inches and a parking stall dimension, was that really necessary under the new code to make that go through a 30-day review in front of the Board of Adjustment? We should probably be able to work with that on a site plan basis and get things moving in the city.
Will that include things like when you still are requiring setbacks or 5 foot of green space and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so
That's not going to be us anymore.
no, that would be under this, it would be administrative. And if they were just totally proposing to just not do anything.
Right.
Then it could potentially go to the Plan and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
But
Okay.
for the most part, we've tried to keep this, the intent of that project direction report was to try and get as much stuff as we could into administrative review so we could speed things up and
Right.
have predictable development, have high quality development, but also have an efficient, quick process to get things moving. So,
Hey, Mike, I got a quick question. Have you got some guidelines set up for staff so they feel like they can color outside the lines? Because it seems like we see a lot of stuff, and I said it earlier in this meeting, you give them a black and a white crayon, they can't use any other color.
right.
And I think you've got some really talented people. Not that we don't want to hear those cases, but I think we make it extremely cumbersome on the community in some instances when everybody goes, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But that's the way it is. So how are you going to address that with staff so that they're comfortable and don't feel like they're going to get their hands slapped and they're not showing favoritism?
Right. Well, the code is very specific on what can be varied by staff and to how much or what degree that can be varied in the code. And so I would say that where those standards ended up, as far as the degree of variation that staff can approve, is very flexible in this code. For example, under the old code, you had an exception level of relief up to 50%, could be with a practical difficulty, and then anything above 50% is a variance. Under this new code, staff can vary, say, a setback requirement by up to 30% administratively. So we used to have an administrative exception that was like 15% of a setback requirement that nobody ever pursued because they had to go get everybody's signature around them to get it approved administratively, and that often took them longer to do than to just go to the Board of Adjustment. So the default was a 30-day process with the board. Under this new code, we can grant up to 30% relief during our site plan review process, which is very, very, I think, flexible in the code. There will be instances where people are going to disagree with that flexibility. And so over time, there's going to be fluctuation in this code. I can see amendments being presented because there'll be a case where somebody wasn't happy about a setback being granted or whatever. But the appeal authority of those decisions is the applicant has the right to appeal a decision on those. But under this code, just like we have any number of administrative decisions that are granted today, the process is if somebody's aggrieved by that, they have to file in district court an injunctive relief, a request for injunctive relief to CSET. So the idea is that the rules were laid out, that they're very spelled out in the code. The amount of relief is very spelled out in the code. As long as we stay within those rails, we should be able to move projects through. And there should be predictable development for neighbors and developers, and certainly predictable processes. And that was our major goal in this.
So if the threshold now is like 30% through staff, there aren't variance type level requests that will ever be granted. Is that true?
No, that's not the case.
Okay.
If they ask for more than that, it's a public hearing in front of the Plan and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Got it.
But
So
kind
that
of
includes
these,
notice to neighbors and everything if they go to the Plan and Zoning.
but the guidelines we've had in the past about, exception level and variance level and the criteria they're in, I couldn't remember if that was like kind of a state law thing on how ordinances work, or if that was more just the function of the previous code.
So Des Moines is the only city in the state that I know of that had implemented that 50%
Okay.
provision
Okay.
for an exception versus a
I-
variance.
Okay.
Now, short of writing a new code,
Yeah,
I recognize every city in this state cannot write a new code like we just did.
right.
That would be one of the first provisions that I would recommend every city in the state adopt. Because if they are considering variances for, under the code, I don't know how you meet that hardship requirement
Yeah.
regularly. And I would, as a professional planner and to the APA, I'm suggesting that that is one thing. There are a lot of good things that are in our old code that could be carried on to other cities to help them,
Right.
make their codes more effective. Because
not
I know
one.
they can't all do this, but certainly that is one provision that I think we've had in Des Moines Code since the 90s, and that is probably still one of the most progressive provisions that's in a zoning code in the state.
It's a head scratcher sometimes.
I really would encourage others to consider that. So
Okay.
You're saying that the exception level is the innovation, that's why.
Correct.
Everybody else just has variances, and that's the
Yeah,
only test that they
variance is
have.
what's set out in state law,
Right.
and then it's backed up by case law.
And those are a tough
Oh,
mountain to
it's
climb.
almost impossible.
Right.
But it's under the special permit provisions of the state code.
Right.
And, it was adopted in the 90s. And so there's, 30 years of precedent set by having that code set up that way. Obviously individual cities will have different interpretations from their legal departments or whatever, but that is one provision that other cities could probably implement that would probably
Exception level.
Yeah.
would probably be addressing a lot of their cases that are coming before them where they're having trouble dealing with a hardship versus a practical difficulty requirement.
Got it. Thank you.
The Planning and Zoning Commission then, if they hear an appeal and they make a decision, is that still just recommended to the city council and the city council have to vote on it? Or they have a new role as essentially us, except for on different things now?
Exactly what you said second.
Wow.
They basically have that added role.
Okay.
It's no longer zoning, so they have the authority to regulate it under the site plan regulations, just like they did when the NPC district was adopted in '98. And the planning commission would be the final decision unless the applicant did not agree with the decision.
Okay.
They could appeal to city council.
So they're going to have kind of a new name? Are they just going to be
No.
called no, they're still going to be called
Well,
Planning
that'd
and
be
Zoning
planning-
Commission?
no, Planning commission or.
Planning Commission.
They still deal with zoning from
Right,
a
right.
recommendation on changes to the zoning map and
Okay.
changes to the land use map and things like that. So it's not a change in.
So their structure, number of members, namesake can stay the
Yeah, there's
same?
no changes currently proposed to
Okay.
that, any of that.
Okay.
So again, we still have a zoning map. It's a new map, prettier colors than we had before. Colors generally match up with our land use map in the code. But I think the key things that we tried to do is, if you recall in the land use map, we have the 500-year floodplain shown as a boundary on our map to provide greater communication of flood hazards to the public. The zoning map only regulates the 100-year floodplain, so it's narrower in some areas than the 500-year floodplain is. But the map still has residential districts, it still has commercial districts, industrial districts, employment districts on that. And I think probably the biggest key difference in this mapping is previously the only, and with this code, previously the only differentiating characteristic of our past zoning code between residential districts was how wide the lot was. And the difference about this code is that one, when you drive up and down the street, you don't have any idea where the lot line begins and the lot line ends when you're driving up and down the street. So you generally know the lots are wide, but you don't know exactly how wide. What really defines a character in neighborhoods is the architecture and the year or the era when the homes were built. And you can see those changes when you drive up and down streets. You know when you're driving into a more contemporary subdivision that's been built in the last 20 years versus a neighborhood that was built in the 1950s versus the 1920s. So the 2020 plan, the last comprehensive plan from 2000, did an excellent job of identifying those architectural characteristics and eras, and we used that information to create this zoning map. And so these maps are now more based on, these zoning districts are more based on architectural character and era than they are lot width.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
All right. So you still start with the zoning map. How to use the code. Do not read it from front to back. It will not make any sense. We have a 10-step guide we've provided you. It is the easiest way to use this code. One positive we did hear throughout the entire hearing process was that people said, the code is easier to use. I mean, they may not have agreed with every regulation that was in it, but the people that actually had taken the time to read through it and follow the 10-step guide found it very easy to find information, and they repeated that to us at the public hearings. So I feel like we did accomplish something very, very significant there. So you start with the zoning map, you look at the map, you find your property. It's a large map, so we have two ways of doing that. You can either click on the zoning map and zoom in until you find your parcel if you're good enough at reading a map and finding your location on the map. The other option is we had an app on the Plan DSM webpage where you could search by address. That's been replaced by the Find My House app that everybody is familiar with. So if somebody just wants to know what their zoning is, they use the Find My House app that's on Plan DSM webpage or the city website, type it in by address, and it brings up the zoning on the property. And then the actual zoning map is on there as well. So different ways of searching. So you find out your zoning, you know what district you're in. Two is, what are those districts? So under the new code in the chapter 134, we still have zoning districts listed. Anything with an X is a mixed use, denoting a mixed use component of the zoning district. So downtown has 3 districts. DX1 is the most intense, so think high rise. DXR is more of a residential character, to be on the periphery. We have the mixed districts, MX1, MX2, MX3. Those are mostly corridor or node zoning districts. So, for example, a large part of Ingersoll is MX2. Southeast 14th would be MX3 for comparison. MX1 would be more like Beaver and Urbandale Avenue, for example, more of a neighborhood commercial character. The RX1, RX2, and EX zoning districts are intended to be buffer districts that are on the kind of, if you think of, if you're familiar with our comp plan, we have those nodes. There's neighborhood nodes, community nodes, and regional nodes shown on the map. Those are like where there's, a grocery store, for example, would predominantly be a community node. That would probably be an MX2 zoning around there. As you transition into the residential single-family neighborhoods around there, around those MX2 districts, for example, you would find RX2. So RX2 goes with MX2. RX1 generally goes with MX1. And it's supposed to be a transition in intensity from those nodes into the residential neighborhoods. So it does expand some of the development potential beyond the nodes, but transitioning back into the neighborhoods. So this is kind of where you'll see a lot of the new opportunities for missing middle housing to go in, would be into those RX1, RX2 zoning districts in this code. A little bit less intensity than you'd have in a high-density multifamily residential at a node, but certainly more density than just single-family detached residential. And the idea of that is we're supporting transit by having that increased density, and also housing affordability by increasing some density and increasing some missing middle housing.
And maybe everyone else understands this, but what do you really mean by node?
Okay, so an activity center, a concentration of commercial is a node.
Okay.
So downtown is our largest node in the entire metro. It's just on a totally different scale, right? There's nowhere else in the metro that has a downtown with as dense of high-rise development as we have in our downtown.
So like Easton and Hubble could be a commercial node there, right?
Yeah, so so that's the largest, right? That's a regional node. Other regional nodes that are on a smaller scale would be like Merle Hay Mall area.
Yep.
Is a regional node, and so is Southridge Mall area.
Right.
Southeast 14th. Those are regional nodes that are, competing with other regional nodes like Jordan Creek Town Center, other areas. Community nodes are basically a grocery store. is kind of the primary defining characteristic of a community node. And then the neighborhood nodes are more like Beaverdale, heart of Beaverdale, Beaver Avenue, and Urbandale Avenue. That neighborhood level commercial restaurant, bookstore, hardware store, that level of retail. Or Highland Park is a neighborhood node on this map.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the zoning map implemented the vision of Plan DSM, and these are districts. We have 2 I districts, which are industrial districts under the new code. Then you get into the residential single-family zoning districts, and these are all denoted by an N, and then there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and some subsets of those districts. And again, the districts you'll see are really defined by architectural character rather than lot width. And so you'll see, like, for example, N2 district is a contemporary zoning district. That'd be your typical suburban subdivision, more on the periphery of Des Moines, versus the N3C, which is post-war cottage architecture. So key differences there. And then again, you have those mixed-use districts like NX1, NX2 that can be along corridors. That's also where we're trying to encourage that missing middle housing and densification to occur. We still have an ag district. We have to. When land gets annexed into the city, it automatically comes in as agricultural. So we have an ag zoning district. We have combined the floodway and floodplain zoning districts into just a flood district under this code. The key differential here was that the board was oftentimes put into a position where you were being asked to allow development in floodplain or floodway, and sometimes the decisions you were hearing or the arguments you were hearing were either absent of having the floodplain administrator input on the regulation. And so what this code has tried to do is lump everything into a flood district, encourage the applicants to be talking with our floodplain administration staff about what can be done on the site, and then if they can get a map amendment approved either through FEMA, then we can rezone the property to another district for use, or the council can decide whether or not they want to rezone it anyway. But rather than granting individual decisions on properties, the council really felt like they wanted to have that purview on the use occurring in the floodplain, because they were very, very concerned about, obviously with the number of flood events we've had, impacted properties. We know more water's coming, more than we've ever had. They're more frequent, more intense. We have to be regulating that floodplain fairly stringently, and they wanted to be the decision makers on it.
So just to put this in reality, so I'll just pick my kids as home. So what would the Drake area be?
Drake is, I believe, on the map, an N5 zoning district. A majority of that is like N5.
Like, what about the Chautauqua Parkway area?
Chautauqua Park, yeah, I was saying N4 or N5. Beaverdale's, I think, N4, N3 on this map. So if you think about it in terms of probably N1 being the least intense, N5 being the most intense or dense, that's probably a good way of looking at it too. So that probably does reflect lot size, the density a little bit in that, but not specifically in the lot width.
And Mike, the colors you have on here behind all these end districts, like this light green, that's not necessarily the color used on the zoning map, is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at like N5 on the zoning map, darkest green is N5.
So here's my question. I can see on that, although it's, very tiny, city's very big, Somerset, Riverwoods, the Northeast, newer
Yellow.
developments, they're a dark brown.
Yeah. PUD.
That's what I was wondering.
Yep.
So I'm assuming, is that your next slide?
Yeah, we still have a PUD district. That's
All
the very
right.
bottom one. So they're legacy PUDs.
Okay.
We
Okay,
did
the
not
legacy.
void any existing PUD in the city.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was that?
We did
Legacy
not
what?
void any planned unit developments in
Okay.
the city of Des Moines.
Okay.
Anything that was zoned planned unit development stayed planned unit development on this map and can be built out according to the approved planned unit development. The change that's been made is that any revision to those plans has to go through planning commission and the
Got it.
council. There's no administrative amendments.
I'm
to it.
assuming previous developers that hadn't fully built out yet, and some of those approved ones wanted to keep it that way, right? In my neighborhood, I would have rather just converted it back to the residential zoning districts like contemporary, but I totally get it. Makes sense. Okay.
The final thing is we have 2 P districts. One is a park open space that could be private or public.
Okay.
P2 is like school, churches, community center type zoning. And you oftentimes have seen this. One of the things now that we've, 5 years later and plus, schools are typically zoned, were previously typically zoned whatever the surrounding residential area was. And how many sign permits have you guys reviewed for signs in front of schools that have to get some sort of variance because it's not allowed in a residential zoning district? We know schools and churches are different characteristic than the single-family house. And so what this did was create a separate zoning district for those. Under the new code, they wouldn't be getting a variance because the sign is allowed. Those reader board signs would be allowed.
That's a lot of pinpoint marks on your map then, right? Because any place of worship then has that
Well,
zoning district.
Not any, but
Well,
the ones we
yeah.
know of, yes.
Yeah, because churches refers to Christians, so.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
right, yeah.
Yeah, place of worship is, I think, the
True definition. Okay. Okay.
limited space on the.
Sure, I get it. Those are examples only.
So you know your district from the map.
Okay.
You read the districts to understand what it is. All the uses are in a table now. So the uses go down the left-hand side, districts go across the top. You can quickly see whether a use is allowed in a zoning district. If it's not, what zoning district is needed. A number of times we get questions on that. It's like, well, what zoning do I need? You're flipping back. We used to have to flip back through the narrative on those, and it was horrible. So this was a very simple, quite honestly, simple
Works.
structure, but it's we could have done this a long time ago, probably, but
It's like consumer
not as easy.
Yeah.
Once you know what your use is allowed, then you have to go again into the design chapter, which would be Plan and Zoning Commission staff's purview, to find out what building type is required. And again, in this thing, the building types go down the left-hand column, the districts go across the top. Not every building type is allowed in every district. There's different design requirements for different building types based on the district. So then each building type has a spread in the code in Chapter 135, Planning and Design chapter. It's generally a 4-page spread. Some of the residential districts now have 6 pages because we wrote in some separate regulations on square footages and on basements and things like that were discussed extensively in the last 6 months. But in general, the same information is available in the same location for each building type. So it always starts with a front page that has photo examples of that building type I would say 90% of the examples in these are local Des Moines examples. If there are a few in there that are of other jurisdictions, but for the most part, those photo examples, character examples are Des Moines projects existing that we're wanting to replicate. Pages 2 and 3 are where you see things that used to be. If you looked at those tables, you go, "Wow, that looks like what probably used to be kind of a bulk standard." Setbacks, or build-to lines in this code, encouraging things to be built at the street, building heights, all those things are in those tables now. And then the final pages of each one of those building types are kind of the additional regulations. So if there's any variation in the square footage or garage requirements or basement requirements or that's kind of in the last pages of each building type. After you get the building type and kind of know the site itself, where the building fits on it, you get into the design requirements. This is where building materials get into play in the code. And again, all of this chapter in the design requirements is eligible for administrative review by staff, so we can vary building materials, we can grant variations and things like that administratively. Obviously, we can't think of every building material that's ever going to be presented under this code. We have new things that are presented all the time. The main intent is durable, high quality installation. Those are the key things of this code. So we want to make sure it has a long warranty on it and that it's installed properly. So we had a little bit of debate about metal. What is metal? Well, we say standing seam metal because it's a concealed fastener on it. It's a covered fastener. We had some requests, well, what about a metal roof you put on a shed? Can't we just allow that? It's like, well, it has exposed fasteners. I guess if they can demonstrate that it's durable and that it's not going to leak, we have the ability in this code to allow it. But we are trying to set also a standard for a little bit higher quality in materials as well. So durability and quality installation. Parking regulations, as I said, are now in the design chapter. Our consultant kind of advised us that roughly the parking regulations probably represent kind of across the board about a 30% reduction in required parking citywide. So from our comp plan, we want to address environmental sustainability, reducing runoff, and one of the quickest ways you can do that is to not be requiring more parking than is needed. I would argue our code probably doesn't cause more parking to be built than is needed.
Right.
Even our old code.
Right.
I would guess lending standards have had a bigger impact on how many parking spaces commercial businesses are providing. They regularly are more than what our code requires. So we did have a discussion, should we be setting parking maximums in this code? We did not get that far with it.
Okay.
I guess you kind of have to, when you're trying to do a whole new code, maybe do what we can now and we'll come back and make revisions to this code, right? But that would probably be the next step that we might want to look at is parking maximums in a future revision to the code. But we're only 2 days into this one, so don't ask for that right now, please. 30% reduction kind of citywide, not every use, not every parking ratio, but just general. Probably takes our whole city to more of an NPC-like zoning standard for parking than where we were. So not quite. NPC allowed a 40% reduction in required parking. This it represents roughly a 30% reduction, so moved that way. It also includes bike parking for the first time in our code. So bike parking is required, outdoor bike parking. Provisions that required indoor bike parking, long-term parking for multifamily residential were stricken from the code during the public hearing process. I would guess we'll probably be revisiting that in the near future. It was at this point left up to kind of market decision on whether to provide that. Some of the solutions that were provided, it requires additional interior space to be built. So then the question was, well, instead of doing that, why don't we just let them use the emergency stairwells to store bikes in? And the fire department was like, absolutely not. Right. You cannot be storing anything in those stairways. So for the time being, we had to take it out of the code, and we'll see if we revisit that in the near future too. Landscape. So we've only had landscape standards in the city of Des Moines since 2004. And so this code is a substantial increase in landscaping from our current standards. Again, to address our sustainability components of the comp plan, this is encouraging more green on sites, green in parking lots, urban tree canopy. If we can treat every drop of water that falls on a property at the site instead of having it run off, it's better for the river, it's better for our storm system, everything. So this code is trying to increase the amount and density of landscaping in new projects across the city. And over time, I think you'll see, when we've only had landscape standards for roughly 15 years, I think you're starting to see on commercial sites now that landscaping's maturing and the difference it's made. Another 15 years from now, I think you'll see even a bigger impact from these new standards. So we're excited about the new standards.
So when you say new projects, you mean like a remodel as well?
Yeah, new site plan. If it requires a new site plan, they'd have to comply with the new landscape standards on these. And again, the landscape standards have that provision that it's entirely, that's one of those things that's negotiable with staff. They're coming in with their plan. We didn't think we needed to be coming in and counting trees with the planning commission, on a site plan basis. We should be able to work that landscaping plan through staff administratively. And that's what we've done for a lot of years on commercial site plans that don't require any planning commission review or anything else. So just continuing that concept. Signs, again, it was all narrative in the previous code. Now it's table format. I don't know how many pages the old sign code was, Sue. I mean, if you cut and paste all the different sections from the individual districts and then everything else, it was probably 20 plus pages. I think our new sign code is like 7, 8. So we cut it in half at least. And I think it's much easier to read. We'd already done some heavy lifting on the sign regulations prior to the effort to write the new code when we adopted the monument sign regulations. Those carried forward into this code, but those provisions about the base height and all of that are things that are eligible for administrative decision-making under this new code as well. So you won't be having to deal with at least the base of the...
That's amazing.
Are you defining signs? I mean, we get into the discussion all the time about that's directional. That's not announcing you've arrived at this place. That's telling you how to get somewhere. So we struggle with, does this need a monument base around it?
Yeah.
Because it's not a sign. Well, what is a sign? That's kind of the vernacular.
I think we've done a pretty good job of defining, better defining sign types versus, directional sign is almost even content, right?
Yeah.
It's telling you where to go. Well, how do you know it's telling you where to go? Because you have to read it. So it's more like either a pylon sign or a monument sign or a driveway sign. It's more location-based rather than content-based in this code. And I think that we've recognized concerns you've had at your meetings in this code and tried to give greater flexibility under the new code and how to do that. So I think you'll find the signs, you'll probably be dealing more with, like, if somebody wants more number of signs than they're allowed, or again, square footage, things like that, but you probably won't be dealing with the monument bases anymore.
One issue that we seem to come across with signs too is with sign vendors. Sometimes I think, gosh, do you people even ever look at the code? And
Right.
I mean, I don't know that it's the city's responsibility to reach out to every sign vendor, but that's just one example. So how do you get the sign vendors to understand the code or know that there is a code? It's kind of like fence permits. A lot of people don't even know they need to get a permit for a fence.
We have a list of sign contractors who are able to pull permits in the city.
Okay.
We are sending them the new code. We are preparing a test that they will have to take in January.
Oh, goody.
So that they will be forced to understand the code.
Yeah.
So that they should be able to understand what they're bringing us.
So
Thank
they'll
you
have
for,
to pass
thank you
the
for
test?
doing that.
They'll have to pass the
They'll
test?
have to pass the test to maintain their license.
Now,
I
does
think
this mean
that makes
employees
total
or
sense.
companies?
C's get degrees.
Do employees have to
One
take it?
person from the company
One
has
person.
to pass the test.
Okay.
And then they
Got
have
it.
to designate who can pull the permits.
Yep.
But it falls
They
on
gotta
them.
sign off then.
We reject the permit if they don't submit it correctly.
Yeah.
So,
right.
yes, we're gonna make sure that,
So then we're going to get away from that. Well, I hired a sign company and I assume they knew what they were doing. We'll get away from more of that. I think that's a great idea.
if they pass the test, they should know what's in the ordinance.
Right.
But I thought we weren't going to get as involved with
Yeah.
them as we do now.
Well, we're gonna kind of make them accountable.
You'll still hear some appeals.
Right.
Right,
But you'll
fewer.
rest
Should be fewer.
assured that they're supposed to know the code.
We won't get variance requests for a monument height that's 1 foot 11 inches instead of 2 feet.
Right, we shouldn't.
Those be done
yeah.
with administrative.
Right.
Okay, good.
One thing I do think you should be expecting, we're only into it 2 days. The lighting standard, there's a maximum illuminance on signs in this code. It's pretty stringent. I mean, it's probably a third of what some of these signs are that have gone up.
But now,
Based on the LED technology, I don't know, other than dimmer switches on every sign, I don't know if they're going to be able to fully comply with that standard. So I'm just telling you right now, at least initially, you're probably going to see some requests come in for relief to that lighting standard. We may end up having to revisit that section, but again, when you're trying to do a comprehensive zoning code for the whole thing, right? To get everything perfect day one, it's not going to happen. Our old code wasn't perfect after 55 years, and our new code isn't perfect after 2 days. So we're going to have to continue to evolve in this and work together and be reasonable and try and find solutions on this. But just moving it from 1965 to 2019 is like night and day difference in
different
how we
century.
administer and work on a code. So, we need to be proud of that as a city. So I went through the parking landscape. Again, we have a lot of flow charts in there that key citizens and developers and neighbors through processes, but we still have stuff in, there's rezonings still available. There are still exceptions and variances available under the zoning chapter, and there are still use variances available under the zoning chapter. Very quickly, there was a lot of discussion about affordable housing last 6 months and what this code is doing. I just wanted to point out some key points that I think are how this code does support affordable housing in the community. As I said, the example I gave you of that multifamily project in downtown, it's eliminating timely, costly, conflicting, and duplicative processes, okay? Time is money. To a developer, it costs them more to build it. They have to charge more in rent to cover their costs. So improving process is the number one thing that we could do to help affordable housing in this community. We are implementing our transportation goals in this code by encouraging density along transit corridors. A lot of things go into household costs, okay? It's not just, the number one is the cost of the housing, but you also have transportation costs and you have healthcare costs. Those are three major components of every household budget. The transportation, if we can encourage that density to be on a transit corridor where somebody can ride a bus, maybe not have to own a car, we are seeing, even in the affordable housing study that came out from Virginia Tech, that total household budgets are actually less on some of these newer projects that are closer into downtown and are along these transit corridors because they're saving significant money on transportation, and they're able to put more of that, they're able to put unused transportation dollars towards housing. So that's a benefit there. The other part of it is, to address the affordability, the other part of it is that this is encouraging walkable neighborhoods, and over time, we can be a healthier neighborhood, a healthier city, that can also potentially be lowering household costs for healthcare if we're living a healthier lifestyle and encouraging walking and active lifestyles. So those are all things that were called for in the comp plan that are, I think, supported by the code. We have predictable standards, I think, and quality standards for developers and neighborhoods that both can understand. We've made multifamily household residential development review by right instead of having to go through planning commission. So again, reducing time. Reintroducing missing middle housing. Under our old code, we prohibited duplexes from being built in any single-family residential zoning district since 1996. So we basically went 23 years without having a new duplex built in any single-family detached neighborhood in the city of Des Moines. And that was because some really bad ones got built before 1996 that everybody pointed to, so the result was, well, then don't let any more get built. And what that has ultimately done, I'm telling you right now, it's coming out of the Home Builders Association literature today. They cannot build single-family detached housing at a market rate affordable price. It's the land costs and the construction costs are too great. We have to densify. We have to allow different product types to be built in neighborhoods to meet that affordability goal in this city. Yep. And so that's going to be reintroduction of that missing middle housing into neighborhoods. So that's what this code does. It does reintroduce missing middle housing. Accessory dwelling units are allowed in this code in any district that has a -2 on it, a single-family residential district that has a -2 extension on the zoning, and then in a lot of those X districts and mixed-use districts. And we hope that if we get some really good examples of those accessory dwelling units, that we'll be able to expand that maybe in the future into other areas as well.
So is that like when you want to live in the carriage house or mother-in-law thing or that kind of stuff?
It could be a detached structure in a rear yard, not necessarily a garage. It doesn't have to be above a garage. It could be a detached structure in a rear yard. And again, when we heard in our comp plan process that people want to be able to stay in their neighborhoods, they want to be able to continue to live there, but they don't have those options. Right. If you could put a detached structure that had everything on grade level in a rear yard, or a caregiver could live in that, and somebody could stay in their home longer. Yep. And maybe that's part of the compensation that person that's a caregiver is getting, is being able to live on the property. then those are things that help people stay in neighborhoods longer, which is what we heard from the public that people want to do. They don't want to have to leave their neighborhoods because they can no longer go upstairs in their house.
Right.
And so if this gives some flexibility to that, then that's a great forward.
And Mike, back to that middle one, the multi-household residential, was that referring to the duplexes?
Anything
or-
over 3 units.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay.
So our zoning districts now are encouraging that multifamily residential on transit corridors.
Yeah.
In the past, we've always had a lot of issue about rezonings being requested further into neighborhoods.
Right.
This map and this code are encouraging that density to be on transit corridors.
Okay.
And that's why we have those buffer districts that transition from the multifamily down to the missing middle, then to single family. History in Des Moines, last 20 years I've been here, you either get single family or you get
Apartment.
24, 36 unit apartment buildings.
Yep.
Which do you want?
Yep.
Not a lot of row houses other than downtown. But we have started to see some in some of our neighborhoods. If you go up to Merle Hay Road, just north of Franklin, where the video store, just north of that former video store there, there's now, I think, 4 or 5 row house units that have been built there. Great fit for the neighborhood.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
Great infill development.
Cool.
So, our steering committee, again, Mel was on there, did a great job, very progressive thinking. We knew that we needed a broader representation to guide all of this from the comp plan to this than maybe existed on just one board or commission in the city. So we had each of the boards and commissions represented, but we also involved the school district, the MPO, the transit authority. We have 9 school districts that are serving the city of Des Moines city limits. Obviously, Des Moines Public Schools is the largest of those, but we tried to have a very diverse, very well-represented steering committee that was guiding this. We had affordable housing advocates and commercial developers, large residential developers.
Something review board.
So, first time in 54 years. It's never easy. I guess if it was easy, it would have been done before 2019. But regardless, it's done. So when I say done, this phase is done. We've got a new code adopted. We're working through it. No code is ever done. They're living documents. We're going to amend these things as time progresses. There will be values that will change in this community that will have to change provisions of this code. We'll find something that just was flat out wrong that we need to correct. It's a living document, and there's a process in place to consider changes to that. There's urban solutions to urban problems for Des Moines. Again, we're trying to address sustainability, not just environmental, but it's fiscal, environmental, and social with this code and our comp plan. And those are 3 key initiatives that we think we've accomplished. We're supportive and coordinated in these efforts so that transportation master plan, everything is all moving in the same direction. Our processes are efficient. We have relief mechanisms in the code for the standards. We had substantial public participation over the last 5 years in this whole process. And so I can honestly say we never turned down an opportunity. If somebody asked us to come out and meet with them, we went out and talked with them about this. And our door was always open for comments, and we took those comments very seriously. And finally, we believe this code is promoting social equity in this community. Again, if we're not sustainable as a city, financially, environmentally, and socially, we're not going to be here to take care of the most vulnerable in this community long term. So I'm very, very proud that we've moved forward as a city as we have in the last 5 years. It is a absolutely fabulous time to be working here as a planner. I am so excited to see the fruits of all this labor that this city and our citizens have put into this. I cannot wait to see the fruits of all of that labor come to fruition and see us just soar. And I really believe that time is now. So anyway, I'm available if you have questions on this, but
I'm just curious about the review process, for enhancements, suggested changes. I mean, you could get boom, 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 you guys could get pinged daily for things. So is your process every 6 months, you'll, give us your enhancement, give us your thought. Every 6 months, XYZ group is going to meet. Like, is that group that Mel was on, or are they going to be pulled back in to meet to
hope not.
discuss enhancements and
We
changes?
certainly
or-
have that group going forward. I mean, there was time
Yeah.
between the comp plan got adopted and we started talking about the code with them. But for right now, we have these short-term rental regs that are coming, revisions that Sue's going to be processing in January. In March, the council asked for us to start looking at some of that missing middle housing and making sure that the design standards are matching up with our tax abatement standards. So there's going to be some revisions to the tax abatement policy and standards to be more in line with the code, and vice versa. So we're going to be working on that. I think probably the next round of revisions to the code, major round of revisions, won't be until the fall next year. I really believe we kind of have to give this some time to kind of figure out were we on target? Did we miss? Make some adjustments, but we can't do that until we see some live implementation of it. I would guess that after like next fall, late fall, early winter, we'll probably kind of go to an annual cycle for revisions to the code. Council's asked for an annual review of like the relief that's being granted to the code, so that we're going to track the relief that we're granting, so that like if there's something that we are always granting,
Right.
we probably need to change the code.
Right.
Strike that from the code if we're always going to grant relief to it. And likewise, if there's something that isn't sufficient, we probably need to probably change the code too. So again, I'm just happy not to be working with a broken code while we're trying to write a new code. I'd rather work with a code that is way better structure, much easier to use, and work on the tweaks to fixing that than to be trying to bandage something that is an obstacle
Absolutely.
for another 20 years while we try and figure this out.
So this puts us on a better field with competition with the suburbs and such, because you often hear, Des Moines codes are so hard and it's so challenging and it takes so much more time. I mean, I'm sure that was part of the reasoning behind this, besides it needed to be updated. But are we on the same par now with, or are we better than what the suburbs are offering?
I will say that I don't know any other jurisdiction in the metro that has a code like ours, nor will any other jurisdiction be able to duplicate our code, because our code is based on the character of our community, and our character is very different from the other characters in the other communities, right? We're much more urban than our suburban partners. But I do know that West Des Moines is looking at doing a code now, and they've been following what we've been doing, and so they're looking at some things. Whether or not they go with a form-based code, I don't know. But I do think that, again, through this whole process, I will tell you, I mean, as I said, we're the capital city, right? The number of eyes that we had on this project, I was blown away. I mean, blown away. I mean, we went through 2 local elections in the time we worked on this code. We're going through a presidential election, which we had presidential candidates weighing in on a zoning code in Des Moines, Iowa in the past year, which I never expected going into like the preparation of this code ever. I mean, I was like, wow. I'm like, we have 20 candidates, Democratic candidates in the city, state fair and everything else, and on papers somebody's quoted as saying something about our zoning code, and I'm like, holy mackerel. I'm like, wow. We started getting national articles in some different papers, and some followed what was just published locally and just repeated it, didn't get any facts. Others called and asked for facts and wrote competing articles about that. But the amount of debate and discussion was significant, and I never expected that. And I can just tell you, the time I've been here 20 years, and we tried to start a code 20 years ago, and just the change in social media and everything in 20 years that I've been here. I mean, I couldn't go home from a meeting without there already being, and have a sandwich without there already being a blog and 100 comments about what was discussed at the meeting before I finished my sandwich on this. It's just totally different dynamics now, right? It's immediate, immediate feedback, immediate time. So, but we also produced a heck of a lot of a document in-house too, because our technology is so much better. So it's just different time.
Well, it's very impressive, and congratulations to you and to the staff.
Yes.
Well, we had a great team, great consultants, great leadership from our boards, commissions, council, and great participation from the public. And I really believe that people give it a chance.
Right.
Give it a chance.
Yeah.
They're going to find this code is actually really, really functional and really easy to use. So
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you, Mike. And just real quick, so big picture stuff, this is great, but next month, staff will maybe have a slightly different format and what they're presenting and what the requested relief is, right? So we'll...
Yeah, there's going to be some overlap because,
Okay.
as I said, we did not stop processing any applications
Okay.
during this whole time while we've been working on the adoption of this code.
So we'll have to
we said
wait in.
anything submitted up until the effective date of the new code gets
Right.
processed under the old code. So you're still going to have some overlap these first few
Just
months
3.
where
Okay.
we're clearing out some of the things that came in right before the code
Yep.
got adopted. And
But we'll have some new ones, maybe even next month already
Yeah, you
under
may see
a
some
new
ones
way of
next
thinking.
month. So
Okay.
we'll do our best to
Oh,
communicate
boy.
what
Everybody be here next month.
your patience, your patience
miss
if you
out.
have to deal with a few more signs. Basics.
That's okay, we'll get there.
We'll get there.
Get there.
We'll get there.
Home occupations, you're going to see a lot more conditional uses.
And apparently, we'll probably see more of these short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
That, I think probably the short-term rental in the near future will be your largest workload coming forward.
And previously, with home occupations and bed and breakfasts, where they lived on site, we aren't strangers for a number of us to that. So hopefully, this would be just a little bent on that, you know, what the impact would be to neighbors and sufficient parking and all those things. So if it's reasonable, great. And if everybody's like, hey, you know, we'll take that into account. So we'll see.
Thank you for your service.
Yes.
Thanks for all your hard
City wouldn't
work.
be What it is without our boards
Yes.
and commissions and our council. So
Yeah,
thank
you have
very
4
much.
great people here we get to work with every month. That's always a privilege for us, so.
Thank you. I'm very
Yes,
proud of them.
you bet, you should
Well,
be.
there's 5 of them. Did you forget about Judy?
Andrew deserves way more credit than I do, because Glenna
Glenna's
poured
right
life
here.
into
Glenna,
this, yeah.
She was, I mean, the
Yeah,
amount of
she's
work
a
Glenna,
trooper.
Frank put into this code.
We kind of like
I
Judy
bet,
okay just
yeah.
fine.
That's probably why she left.
Thank you.
Counting ahead.
Thank you, Mike. Good stuff.
All right, this hearing is officially adjourned.
Right.
Is there going to be an odor code for you, Sue Ann?
Helpful.